At first, this sounds like a glamorous billionaire drama. But underneath the luxury is something deeply human: emotional manipulation, conditional love, and the terrifying moment someone's mask slips off. Chloe does panic because of the bankruptcy. She breaks when she realizes her husband sees her family as contamination. In just a few seconds, her entire marriage changes meaning. And that psychological shift from safety to danger is what makes this story impossible to stop listening to.
My name is Sloan Montgomery. In Silicon Valley, that name wasn't just known, it was currency. It meant Atherton estates and fundraisers for causes so exclusive they didn't need press. It meant being the only daughter of Arthur Montgomery, the venture capitalist who built empires, and told me our name was the one stock that never drops. Until it did. My perfect life shattered right in the middle of our 10th anniversary party.
Sloan, the gardenias are divine!
Caitlin Breyer chirped, kissing the air by my cheek while her eyes darted past me. A little place in Half Moon Bay, I smiled. A total lie. My smile was pure performance art. The gardenias, sourced from a rare grower in Carmel, were the most modest expense of the night. Our 10,000 square foot Atherton estate was a testament to our power. Dom Perignon flowed from a massive, sculpted ice luge while a string quartet played something classical and understated. Every pane of glass reflected the titans of the tech world. My husband, Ethan, stood near the infinity pool, his laugh echoing with the confidence of a man who just closed another billion-dollar deal. He caught my eye and flashed a quick, boyish grin. My heart did that familiar, foolish flutter it always did for him. Ethan Reed, the celebrated AI wonderkind with a smile that could charm senators and venture capitalists alike, was the perfect man to merge with the Montgomery dynasty. At least, that's what I believed. My phone vibrated in my clutch, a text from an unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again, a more insistent pulse. A sudden cold prickle went down my spine, the kind of primal fear that old money teaches you to ignore. Pardon me, Caitlin. I moved toward the glass doors overlooking the valley lights. The text was blunt, a single link. Below it, the words, "Thought you should see this before it breaks." My thumb trembled as I tapped the link. It was a draft from a major tech journal. The headline hit me like a physical blow. Montgomery Capital implodes. The article was brutal. A house of cards. Misrepresented assets. The SEC was investigating. The board was in turmoil. Banks were pulling their credit lines. My father was facing personal and corporate ruin. Ruin. That word didn't exist in our vocabulary. It was for failed startups, not for legends like my dad. It's not true, I whispered to myself. The fund just had a record quarter. The last line of the article seemed to answer me directly. The reported numbers, sources say, were pure fiction. The words on the screen blurred. Over-leveraged, a decade of bad bets, hidden by fraudulent accounting. And it was all gone. Everything. The string quartet began a cheerful new piece. I looked up and saw Ethan, laughing with a rival CEO, perfectly at ease. He hadn't noticed I was gone. Then I saw the final paragraph. It mentioned a silver lining for Ethan's company, a rumored last-minute merger that would protect his assets completely. It was a deal that would cut my father out entirely. The deal had been in the works for weeks. The article made it sound like he was a genius, escaping the sinking ship. My blood ran cold. The party hadn't changed, but my whole world just had. The Dom Perignon was still pouring. The gardenias still smelled sweet. But the ground beneath my feet had just given way. I walked back into the throng, my heels sinking into the antique rug. I went straight for Ethan, grabbing his arm. He leaned in, his breath smelling of single malt scotch and victory. "We need to talk now. In your office." His charming smile tightened at the edges. "Can it wait, darling?" "I'm in the middle of something with Mark Benioff." "No." My voice was a shard of ice. "It can't." He smoothly excused himself, his public face perfect, and followed me into the minimalist glass-walled office. the heavy door clicking shut behind us. The music vanished, replaced by the low hum of servers. What was so important you had to pull me from that conversation? Ethan snapped, the charm gone. In the cool light of the monitors, his face seemed alien. My father's fund, I managed, the words thick in my mouth. It's gone. It's over. I watched his face, waiting for the shock, the worry, the promise we'd face it together. Instead, his posture changed. He relaxed. The tension in his jaw disappeared. He looked free. I know, he said. Those 2 words hit me harder than the article. You know? The leak came from my team. He walked over to his minimalist bar and poured himself a tequila. Neat. He didn't offer me one. I had to know when the story was breaking. I had to get my own deal finalized before the fallout hit. I just gaped at him. Fallout? Ethan, that's my father. Your father, he said, taking a sip, was a dinosaur running a Ponzi scheme. A brilliant one, but a Ponzi scheme. He was using capital from new unicorn investments to hide the failures of his old ones. The SEC has been building a case for a year. Tonight, the whole thing imploded. He delivered the news like a quarterly earnings report. The room tilted. I leaned against a bookshelf filled with books he'd never read. How can you be so calm? We need to get to my father. We need to call our lawyers. We don't need to do anything, Sloan. He set his glass down. You need to handle your family's mess. I need to protect my assets. A fissure split right through my heart. Your assets? My company, my intellectual property, my stock options. He looked at me then, and his eyes were completely empty. A stranger. Our prenup is ironclad. Thank God for that. My algorithm, my consents, my personal investments, they're all walled off. Shielded from your father's creditors and from you. Each word was a clinical incision. This isn't emotional, Sloan. It's a strategic pivot. The Montgomery name is now toxic. It's a liability I can't afford. He moved closer, his voice low. I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning. My lawyers had the papers ready for a month. The air left my lungs. I laughed, a raw, broken sound. You're kidding me. This is some kind of sick joke, right? I've never been more serious. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. He brought divorce papers to our own anniversary party. This is the exit agreement. It's all here. Sign it tonight, and we contain the narrative. You get a modest severance package. If you fight me, he just shrugged, you'll lose. Badly. And you'll have nothing left but debt and bad press. I looked at the papers, disgusted. Severance package? What about this house? Our home? A cold, smug smile touched his lips. This estate is titled to an LLC I control, always has been. A gift from my first round of investors. You were just a resident. It's my asset. Same with the condo in Tahoe and the vineyard in Napa. All shielded. All mine. A decade of curated, beautiful lies crumpled around me. The homes I had designed, the future I thought we were building it, was all just staging. You knew, I whispered, the full, sickening truth landing. You planned for this exact scenario. My name isn't on a single title. That prenup wasn't about our future. It was about protecting your assets from me. It's just risk management, sweetheart, he said. The pet name sounding obscene. You always have to hedge liabilities, and your father's fund was a ticking time bomb. The shock curdled into pure incandescent rage. You bastard! All of it! Was our marriage just another investment that went bad? His expression shifted, not to remorse, but to annoyance mice. It was a good partnership. But this is business, Sloan. When a legacy company fails, you don't go down with it. You pivot, and I'm not sinking with the Montgomery name. He offered the papers and a pen. Sign them. Get your things. Be gone by Friday. It's the most efficient exit. Go to hell. His jaw set. Fine. Your choice. But if you fight, I'll crush you. I have the top lawyers in the valley. You have a disgraced father and a name that's about to be a punchline. Just sign the agreement. Take the offer. You walk away clean with enough seed money to rebrand yourself. Seed money. The idea was so absurd I almost choked. My life's work reduced to a startup fund. My owned trust will be frozen, seized with the rest of my father's assets. This is your only way out. My last gesture of goodwill. Goodwill. The word tasted like acid. Just then, the office door slid open. A sleek, dark-haired woman peered in. Elara, my friend since Stanford. Her face was a mask of perfect concern, but her eyes were cold. Darling, is everything okay? The mood out there is getting tense. Of course, it was. In this valley, bad news travels at the speed of light. Ethan didn't even flinch. Come in, Elara. Perfect timing. Sloan was just agreeing to the terms of our demerger. She slipped inside, closing the door. She wouldn't look at me. She went to Ethan's side, her hand on his arm in a gesture of pure ownership. The last piece of the nightmare clicked into place. You, I whispered. The two of you. Elara actually looked sympathetic. Sloan, it's just a pivot. Ethan and I are aligned. Our world can't afford sentimental attachments. How long? My voice was barely a whisper. Ethan replied, long enough. Did it matter? It mattered, because every late-night design session, every city planning dinner, every secret shared was now a lie. Every time she'd soothed me about Marcus's long hours, every time she'd marveled at our city view, it was an act. Get out, I said, my voice barely a whisper, trying to hold it together. Both of you, get out of my home. My home, Marcus corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. He slid the papers across the counter. The terms? Amelia, my lawyer gets here at 9. I suggest you be pragmatic. He took Olivia's hand, her hand, and led her away, back to the dying party, my marriage, my entire world. I stood there, alone in the silent, glass-walled room. Through the door, I could hear the party chatter fade, the goodbyes growing hurried. The music stopped. I went to the window and looked down. One by one, the line of black cars pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the fog like rats fleeing a sinking ship. My phone buzzed, a news alert. Breaking. Real estate titan collapses. Beaumont Properties files for bankruptcy. AG launches probe. I collapsed into my father's leather chair, the cold a shock. I picked up the settlement. The language was cold. It specified I vacate the apartment, accept a one-time payment of $3 million, a complete joke, and forfeit any claim to all other assets. In exchange, Marcus offered a swift, quiet divorce. No contest. My hands were trembling. I reached for the pen, a heavy thing from our first big deal. I pictured my father, alone, his life's work turning to ash. I saw Marcus's cold, triumphant gaze, Olivia's betrayal. I put the pen down. I wasn't signing. Not this way. Maybe it was just pride, or the Beaumont spine my father always talked about. Never make a deal on your knees, Amelia. I was in a grave, the one he'd dug for me. The door opened again. It was Sophia, our apartment manager. Her kind face was etched with concern. Mrs. Thorne, the guests have all left. The staff, what are your instructions? I looked at this woman who'd managed our lives with quiet competence for years. I thought of the others, the chef, the cleaners, the driver, their livelihoods, tied to this bubble that had just burst. Give everyone the rest of the week off, full pay, and thank them. She nodded, her eyes getting glassy. She knew, they all knew. When she was gone, the silence was deafening. I was alone in the penthouse that wasn't my home anymore, married to a man who wasn't my husband, the daughter of a man who was now a villain. I pulled out my phone, a dozen missed calls. Only one mattered. I dialed. He picked up. Dad, my voice shattered on the word, a little girl's voice, Amelia. My father's voice was exhausted, aged a lifetime, but it was steady. The voice that explained blueprints to me, that told me I could build anything. You heard, Marcus is leaving me. He is taking it all. He knew, Dad. He knew before anyone. A long sigh came through the phone. I am so sorry, sweetheart. This is my fault. My arrogance. What do I do now? The question was a whisper. You survive, he said. And I could hear that old steel strength, fractured but still there. You are a Beaumont. We don't break, we demolish and we rebuild. Do you hear me? He wants me to sign tonight. Don't. My father's voice was sharp. Don't you sign a single thing. Not until you speak to my lawyer. Arthur, he's still the best. Promise me. I promise. Good. Now listen, this is going to get messy. The press will come for you. Go dark. I'm calling Arthur right now. He'll be in touch. Dad, you okay? An absurd question. I've built my way out of worse holes, he said, a ghost of a smile in his voice. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let him see you cry. Not that snake. He isn't worth a single tear. A hot tear escaped down my cheek anyway. I wiped it away, angry. Okay, I love you, Amelia. No matter what happens tomorrow, remember that. I love you too, Dad. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark office in the wreckage of my old life, and I did not cry. I made a list in my head. Call Arthur. Find my own lawyer. Secure any capital I can before it's all frozen. Find a place to live. The scale of it all was suffocating. Somewhere a clock ticked. The night stretched before me, empty and terrifying. The world I was built for had simply vanished. My name was Amelia Thorne, and as of tonight, that name was worthless. But sitting in the dark, something else began to. Not hope. Something colder, sharper, more focused. It meant I had nothing left to lose. Sleep never came. I spent the hours wandering the huge, silent penthouse, a ghost haunting her own life. Every piece of art, every photo of us, smiling somewhere warm. It all felt like evidence from a crime scene I didn't know I was part of. By morning, gray light crept over the city. I was showered, dressed in my armor of a crisp blouse and slacks, sitting at the kitchen island with a cold coffee. My laptop was open. The internet had already tried and convicted the Beaumont name. "Beaumont bust," screamed one headline. "Empire of Glass collapses," reported the Times, just as brutally. My father S. face, once on the cover of Forbes, was now the icon of failure on every financial blog. My social feeds were a flood of notifications, some shock, but mostly morbid curiosity. A few friends had already unfollowed me. Olivia, I saw with a cold feeling, had posted a sunrise picture captioned, "New day, new horizons." #grateful. I heard Marcus' expensive shoes on the polished concrete before I saw him. He appeared in the doorway, already in a perfectly tailored suit. His tie was knotted precisely. He looked refreshed, energized, like a man who'd just closed the deal of a lifetime. "You re-up early," he noted, walking to the espresso machine without looking at me. Couldn't sleep. The sound of my world collapsing was a little loud. He ignored the sarcasm, perfectly steaming milk. "My lawyer, David Chen, will be here at 9. Did you look over the agreement?" I glanced at the papers. "Seems like you valued me at the price of a high-end sports car." He finally turned, leaning against the counter. "It's a generous offer, Amelia, considering. You would be an absolute fool not to take it. If you fight me, you'll burn through that $3 million in legal fees in a year, and you will lose. I have everything documented. The prenup is ironclad. Your father S. fraud makes any claim you have on our assets completely toxic. It's done, Amelia. Sign the papers, take the money, and start over somewhere quiet, maybe Philadelphia." The condescension in his voice felt like a slap. "I'm not going to Philadelphia, Marcus. This is my city. New York is my home, not anymore." His voice was quiet, absolute. "The Building S Co-op Board is already scheduling an emergency meeting. Having someone linked to a major financial scandal living here is bad for property values. You understand. They will push you out. I will push you out. It will be much easier if you just leave." I stood up, my legs shaking but holding firm. "I am not signing a thing until I speak with my own lawyer. Arthur Goodman is representing me." For a moment, something crossed his face, irritation. "Arthur is drowning in your father's disaster. He won't have time for a simple divorce. And honestly, his reputation is just as toxic as yours now. You're better off finding someone online." He checked his watch. "I have to go. The markets are going to be a bloodbath today. So many opportunities. He said it with a predator's smile. He was going to profit from my family's ruin. Of course he was. You knew, didn't you? The words hung in the air, heavier than the coffee aroma. You knew my father's business was sinking before last night, maybe for months. He placed his cup down with unnerving calm. I'm in the business of knowing things, Amelia. It's what I do. I saw the rot in Beaumont Properties ages ago. I just positioned myself. Positioned yourself. I tasted the bitter words. By marrying the Fomsbal daughter? Was our life just part of the deal? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was in the cold void where his love should have been. And Olivia, I pushed, my voice trembling. Was she part of your strategy too? Your backup? A private server key card. For a moment, his perfect tech mogul calm shattered, revealing raw fury. Leave Maya out of this. This is about the company. It's just business. This was my life. The words felt small in the massive, sterile living room. My father, my marriage, our baby. This wasn't a line item on a spreadsheet. This was everything. And that chapter is closing, he said, his voice a low, cold threat. Sign the postnup, Elara. Be at the lawyer's office by 10, or I'll have security escort you from this glass tower with nothing but the clothes on your back. Don't you dare make this ugly. He spun on his heel and walked away. I heard the whisper of the private elevator doors. He was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical weight, pressing down on me. I felt like I was suffocating. I had to do something, anything. I couldn't just stay in this gilded cage waiting for the end. My first call was to our family lawyer, Mr. Sterling. It went straight to a full voicemail. I tried his emergency line. A calm assistant told me Mr. Sterling was in an unscheduled deposition and would be unavailable all day. A cold, sharp dread began to bloom in my chest. I was totally and completely alone. No, not entirely. I grabbed a worn backpack and stuffed in some cash, my passport, my mother's pearls, and my tablet. I had no clue where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. As I passed the entryway consoles, I saw our photo from the tech summit in Kyoto. My smile was so hopeful, so genuine. His was triumphant, the look of a predator that had just cornered its prey. I slid the picture from its minimalist steel frame, tore it clean in half, and tossed his smug face into the recycling bin. The Vance family estate was a modern masterpiece of glass and redwood in Napa Valley. It was my father's greatest design. I took my first steps on its heated stone floors. I had my 16th birthday party by its infinity pool. It was the one piece of my history I thought was untouchable, secured in a family trust. The black SUV with tinted windows parked by the main gate was the first sign I was wrong. The second was the official TOTUS laminated to the enormous glass front door. A seizure warrant from the Securities and Exchange Commission. This property is now under federal oversight. I just stood there on the gravel driveway, the warm California sun feeling like a sick joke, staring at the seal. They had worked so quickly. The government doesn't mess around. My childhood home was now part of a federal investigation. I dug through my bag for my keys. The sleek, custom-made key felt wrong in my hand now. I slid it into the lock. Nothing. It wouldn't turn. They had already changed the locks. Ma-am, you can to be here. A man in a navy blue windbreaker stepped from the shadow of the doorway. He looked young, and his tone was almost apologetic, but his stance was rock solid. This is my home, I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign. I'm sorry, ma'am, but the property has been sealed by federal court order. No one is permitted access without direct authorization from the SEC. He gave a subtle nod toward the black SUV, they keeping an eye on the place. I stared at the vehicle, feeling their invisible gaze. My father, Robert Vance, is he inside? The agent's professional mask softened with a flicker of human pity. No, ma'am. He hasn't been on the premises since early this morning. A few agents came by and escorted him to the city for an interview. Haven't seen him since then. My knees felt like they might give out. They had him. My father, who sketched beautiful buildings and collected rare wines, was in some cold government room. Do you know where he is? Have they charged him with anything? I'm sorry, that's not information I have. You'll have to get in touch with his legal counsel. The one who wasn't taking my calls. I nodded, a quick, jerky motion. I walked back to the curb where the Uber ID called on Marcus' corporate account. A detail that now turned my stomach was waiting. I gave the driver the address for the Vance Design Center in downtown San Francisco. The building, a twisting monument to my father's genius, was under siege. News vans lined the block, their satellite dishes aimed at the tower like weapons. Reporters and camera crews were a mob behind temporary steel barricades. A small group of protesters with handmade signs were yelling at the main entrance. I pulled on a pair of large sunglasses, ducked my head low, and had the driver take me around to the rear loading bay. The security chief at the dock, Miguel, knew me on sight. He'd worked for my father for 30 years. He used to slip me architectural drafting scissors and pencils when I visited the office as a girl. Today, his face was a mask of sorrow. Miss Vance, you should not be here. Miguel, I need to get to my father's studio, please. He hesitated, casting a nervous look at the chaos out front. It's a madhouse. The feds are swarming the whole building, taking everything. They tearing it all apart. It's just not right what they're doing to your dad. Please, Miguel. He breathed out a long, weary sigh and gave a sharp nod. He buzzed me through to the freight elevator. Get up to the penthouse floor, but you need to be quick about it. They have agents posted on every level. The elevator doors opened onto the 30th floor. The usual creative hum of the studio was gone. In its place was a quiet, methodical destruction. Men and women in plain, ill-fitting suits, SEC and FBI, were wheeling out carts piled high with blueprints and files. They were pulling drives from servers, unplugging 3D printers, and slapping yellow evidence tape on everything. The architectural models were gone from their pedestals, leaving dusty, sad squares. The few remaining employees were huddled in small, shell-shocked groups, whispering. I walked like a zombie toward the studio, my father's sanctuary. The door was propped open. 2 agents were inside. One was photographing the contents of the room, while the other carefully packed my father's collection of antique drafting tools into a foam-lined case. You can come in here, the one with the camera said, his voice more weary than aggressive. I am his daughter. The 2 agents exchanged a brief, silent look. The older one, a man with tired eyes and a tired face, gave a small nod. You've got 1 minute, but don't touch anything. I stepped into the room. It felt violated. The massive, custom-built drafting table was totally clear. Its surface was dusted with the fine black powder used for fingerprints. His special ergonomic chair was pushed aside as if my father had left in a sudden rush. I could almost feel him there. Just yesterday, the walls finally closing in. My eyes scanned the room, searching for something, a hint, a message, anything at all. And then I saw it, hidden inside the miniature model of our Napa home. It was a spot only I would know to look for. A tiny black data key with no label on it. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I looked over at the 2 agents. They were now arguing over how to safely transport a large, delicate model of a skyscraper. I drifted slowly toward the display table, pretending to look at an empty shelf. In one fluid motion, I reached into the model, plucked the data key free, and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans. Time's up, Miss Vance. The older agent's voice was flat. I'm sorry for your trouble. For what it's worth, your father was always a stand-up guy in my book. I worked security at a charity gala he sponsored. His unexpected attempt at kindness felt like a slap. I just nodded, unable to speak, and walked out. I didn't bother with the freight elevator this time. I took the fire stairs, welcoming the ache in my legs, the raw physical strain. I slammed the door to the executive parking garage open, the cool, exhaust-scented air a strange comfort. And that S when I saw her, leaning against a structural column right next to Marcus's ridiculous new Tesla Cybertruck, was Maya. She was on her phone, laughing, a light, airy, musical laugh that was an insult to the concrete gloom surrounding us. Then her eyes met mine, and the laughter died in her throat. She ended the call. "Alara." "Oh my God, what on earth are you doing here?" I could ask you the same thing. My voice was dangerously calm. "Did you come to see what you could salvage? Maybe pick out some new furniture for the condo you'll be sharing with my husband?" She actually had the audacity to look guilty. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Maya? Please, enlighten me. Because where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you were sleeping with my husband while pretending to be my best friend. Did the two of you get a good laugh comparing notes about me behind my back?" Her expression hardened. The friendly, supportive mask disintegrated, revealing something sharp and bitter underneath. "You always made everything about you, didn't you, Alara? Your perfect architect father, your perfect tech genius husband, your perfect little baby on the way." It was nauseating. Did you ever stop to think Marcus needed who understood his world? Someone who wasn't just another beautiful part of his brand portfolio? The sheer venom in her tone was breathtaking. This wasn't just a simple affair. This was a deep, festering hatred that had been growing for years. So what was all this? Some kind of strategic power move? Liberating my husband from his picture-perfect life? It was always going to end this way. She shrugged, admiring her perfectly lacquered nails. "Your entire life was a fantasy. Your father's business, your marriage. It was all a story you told yourself. Marcus and me, we reality. We see things as they really are. You see a chance to upgrade your lifestyle." I shot back. "You were always so unbelievably jealous. Of my family, of the money, of him. You could never just be my friend." "Happy for you?" She laughed, a short, ugly bark. "While you were playing house and picking out names for a baby, some of us were in the trenches, working and fighting for a seat at the table. You were just handed everything. Well, sweetie, the family fortune is officially a ghost. Welcome to the real world." Chloe's laugh was sharp in the marble powder room. She admired a new diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Oh, and Richard's big architects conference in Aspen last month? I was there. The snow was absolutely magical." She smirked, her breath smelling of champagne and victory. "He's leaving you, Ava. It's all over. I just stood there, my ears ringing. Aspen. He brought me back a cheap pinecone paperweight. I felt sick. I leaned against the cool wall, trying to breathe, the world tilting with the sheer force of his betrayal. The envelope my father's assistant gave me earlier felt impossibly heavy in my clutch. My fingers shook as I tore it open in the back of the town car. Inside was a single, heavy, antique brass key. It looked like it belonged to a forgotten castle, not somewhere in Chicago. There was no note, just the key. Then I saw them 2 letters faintly etched into the handle. E.C. Edward Chandler, my father, and a number, 418. It was meaningless to me. A P.O. box? Some storage unit? My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, my voice strained. "Ava Chandler?" A man's voice asked, smooth as ice. "Who is this? My name is Mr. Davies. I am Richard Sterling Sess Lawyers. You missed your 10 a.m. meeting." "I know. My client's generous offer had a deadline, Mrs. Sterling. His patience has run out. The separation agreement required you to vacate the property immediately. Since you refused, we've moved on." An icy dread crept up my spine. "What does that mean?" "It means, as of 12 p.m. today, the locks to the penthouse were rekeyed. Your personal effects are being packed and moved into storage. Your access cards have been wiped. Any attempt you make to enter the building will be considered trespassing, and we will involve the authorities." He had done it. He actually locked me out. You can't do that. I live there. You were a resident, Mrs. Sterling, not an owner. Mr. Sterling has revoked that privilege. It is perfectly legal. The storage details are in your email. You'll have 30 days to claim your belongings before they're liquidated. I've also forwarded the divorce petition filed this morning. I suggest you get a lawyer. Goodbye. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the city lights blurring. I was homeless. I was broke. My husband was a monster, and my best friend was a traitor. All I had was the gown on my back, my purse, and this strange old key. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked, his expression full of pity in the rearview mirror. I had no idea. A hotel? With what cash? My cards were tied to Richard, who had surely frozen them all by now. My own account had a couple $1,000s, which wouldn't even last a week in Chicago. Then I looked at the key. 418. Henry, I asked our driver, does the number 418 mean anything to you? An address or a business? He'd worked for my family for years. He thought for a moment. Not an address, but there is an old private repository on the Gold Coast. Very exclusive. They call it the Archive. I heard they use client numbers for privacy. It's on Astor Street. Want to try it? It was a sliver of hope. A single thread. Yes, Henry, please, Astor Street. The Archive was a plain limestone building tucked between two sprawling mansions. There was no sign, just a discreet brass plaque beside a heavy oak door. 418. My heart was pounding. 418. I pushed the buzzer. A small camera whirred to life and focused on my face. Yes? A crisp voice said from a speaker. My name is Ava Chandler. I have the key for number 418. After a short pause, the door buzzed and clicked open. The air inside was still and cool, smelling of leather and old books. The lobby was empty except for a giant oak desk. Behind it sat a man in a gray suit, his eyes sharp. Mrs. Chandler, he said, his voice quiet, we have been expecting you. A chill ran down my spine. Expecting me? Who? Your father. He left specific instructions. The man held out a gloved hand. The key, please. I gave it to him. He inspected it, nodded, and came around the desk. This way. He led me down a silent, carpeted hall lined with identical steel vault doors. 415, 416, we stopped at 418. He put the key in the lock, turned it with a solid clunk, and swung the massive door inward. You have 1 hour, he said. The vault is secure. There are no cameras. When you leave, just shut the door. It locks on its own. Return the key to the front. He turned and disappeared down the hall, his footsteps silent. I stepped inside. The room was small, quiet, and cold. A single steel table stood in the center. On it sat 3 things: a thick manila envelope with my name in my father's handwriting, a small leather jewelry box, and a slim slack burner phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the letter. It read, My dearest Ava, if you are reading this, things are even worse than I feared. And for my part in that, I am endlessly sorry. I failed you, and that is a failure I'll carry to my grave. First, know that I love you. Don't believe what you read in the papers. You were always the best part of my life. Second, you are in danger. Not of violence, but of erasure. Richard Sterling is not the man you married. Your relationship, your marriage, it was a calculated business move from the very beginning. He was put in your path by the Dalton Collective to get to you, to get to our company, to find a weakness. He's as a shark, and like a fool, I walked my most precious creation right into his cage. This bankruptcy part of it is real. The losses are staggering, but it is also a smokescreen, a controlled implosion. The complete truth is too dangerous to put on paper, even in here. The phone will ring 1 time. You must answer. The box contains what I could save. It isn't much, but it is yours, completely clean. Use it to stay alive and be clever. Trust no one. Not our lawyers, not family friends, and absolutely no one in Richard's circle. They are watching you. My biggest regret, my love, was not teaching you how to be ruthless. I wanted to shield you from the ugliness of my world. In doing so, I left you completely exposed. Forgive me. When the phone rings, you will know what to do. Be brave. Be the Chandler I raised. All my love. I read the letter again and again. The words twisted into a grotesque new image. Richard, a corporate spy. My marriage, a lie. A conspiracy created by my husband and his bosses. I felt the room spin. The Dalton Collective. I knew that name. Henry Dalton, a vicious rival who'd been trying to destroy my father's business for years. Dalton was at the gala tonight. I saw him slap Richard on the back, laughing. I thought it was nothing. My father always called him a barbarian with a bottomless bank account. I opened the leather box. Inside, on black velvet, lay my mother's pearl earrings, the simple studs she wore every day. Under them was a thick bundle of bearer bonds. I counted, $500,000. Nothing compared to what we'd lost, but it was cash, untraceable. It was a start. And under the bonds, a Swiss passport. It was in my name, but the photo was a stranger. My hair was dark, cut into a bob I'd never worn. Ava Chandler was gone. In her place was Kate Muller with a new birthday. The passport was flawless. My father didn't just fear this, he planned for it. A new life. An escape route. The thought made me dizzy. As I stared at the new me, the burner phone on the table rang, a single sharp shriek that made me flinch. My heart hammered in my chest. Answer it, my father's letter echoed. I flipped it open. Hello? There was a pause, just breathing. Then a voice, digitally altered, cold and anonymous. The key isn't just for the vault. I froze. Who is this? A friend of your father's. Listen to me. You are being watched. A PI named Parker, hired by Richard. He followed you from your father's office. He's across the street now in a black Lincoln Navigator. Michigan plate Foxtrot, Bravo 5, 2 Echo Niner. Do not go back the way you came. A jolt of pure terror went through me. Followed, of course. Richard would want to know what I was up to. What do I do? In the back of this vault, the fourth panel from the right. Push the top left corner. It opens to a service tunnel. It will take you to the sub-basement of the hotel next door. Leave through their service alley. A dark blue sedan will be there. Get in. The driver is Jonas. He will get you somewhere safe. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger, I whispered, my voice trembling. Your other option is walking out that front door, right into your husband S trap. His orders are to record your every move, everyone you see. He will hunt you until you have nowhere left to run. Your father's gift won't stay secret long if Richard finds out it exists. Trust starts somewhere, Elena. Your father trusts me. That's all that matters right now. The line went dead. I stood alone in the silent vault, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. Fear was at war with desperation. This was insane. Secret tunnels, disguised voices, safe houses, this was stuff from spy movies. Not for girls who grew up summering on Lake Geneva. But then, girls from Lake Geneva don't usually have their lives burned to the ground by a cheating husband and a disgraced father. I glanced at my mother's jewels, the bearer bonds, the fake passport. My father, for all his mistakes, never did anything by halves. He planned for this. He knew I'd be in serious danger. My mind was made up. I slipped the jewelry and bonds into my coat's lining. I put the passport and burner phone in my purse. I folded my father's letter, keeping it in my pocket, close to me. I found the hidden panel on the wall. It was seamless, totally invisible if you didn't know exactly where to look. I pushed the bottom right corner. With a quiet whoosh, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage that smelled like damp concrete and decay. I took one last look around the vault, at what was left of my old life spread out on the table. Then I stepped into the darkness. The door hissed shut behind me, sealing me in. A single dim emergency bulb flickered on overhead. I followed the corridor, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. It ended at a heavy steel door. I pushed it open. I was in a dusty, cluttered basement that smelled of old books and binding glue. The hum of machines rumbled above me. I moved through stacks of boxes toward a sliver of light from a loading dock door, left slightly ajar. I peered out into the quiet alley, and there, idling at the curb, sat a black SUV. A solid-looking older man in a driver's cap was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette. He saw me immediately drop the smoke and crushed it with his shoe. He gave me a single, small nod. That must be Silas. I took a deep breath, clutched my bag to my chest, and ran for the car. The back seat of the SUV smelled of clean leather and citrus. Silas, the driver, was a man of few words, with a face that looked like it was carved from stone. He didn't ask any questions, just gave me a quick glance in the rearview mirror and said, "Buckle up, ma'am." His voice was a low rumble, like shifting gravel. We drove for what felt like an eternity. He took a winding route through Chicago, over the Scotsway to the suburbs, down back alleys in Pilsen, back across the bridge, and through the loop. He was checking for a tail. The professional, calculated way he drove was somehow both terrifying and incredibly reassuring. My life wasn't a spy movie anymore. This was real. We finally pulled into a garage beneath a nondescript pre-war apartment building in Lincoln Park, not too far from the university. The neighborhood felt academic, respectable, a whole other world from the glittering towers of downtown. Silas led me to the 4th floor in a creaky, old-fashioned elevator. He used an actual key to open apartment 4C. The place was small, immaculate, and had absolutely no personality. Tan walls, a worn but clean couch, a tiny kitchenette. It looked like a corporate rental, furnished straight from a catalog. There were no photos, no decorations, nothing personal at all. Just safety, anonymity. "Fridge is stocked," Silas said, his voice echoing in the bare room. "Bedrooms back there, fresh sheets. This place is a ghost. It has no traceable link to you, your father, or anyone. It was paid for in cash. Here you don't exist." He placed a new, simple cell phone on the counter. "This is clean. My number's the only one in it. Emergencies only. Don't call anyone from your past. Not yet." "How long do I have to stay here?" My voice sounded small in the sterile apartment. "Until it's safe. Or until you use that passport and just disappear." He looked at me then, his dark eyes a weird mix of pity and determination. "Your father, he wanted you to have a choice. A real chance to fight. Those bonds, that new identity, that's your way out. The UK, South America, wherever. You could be Anna Vance by tomorrow night. Live a completely normal life. And what if I don't want to run?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then you fight. But you need to understand, the people you're about to fight don't follow any rules. They've already taken your money, your home, and your reputation. They'll take more if you let them. Sometimes the best revenge is living a good life, even if it's quiet somewhere else." "I'm not the quiet life type," I said. The words surprised me with their firmness. "Didn't think so," Silas grunted. "I'll be in touch. Don't go outside. Don't order food to this address. There's a laptop on the desk. It's secure. You can read the news, but don't log into any of your personal accounts. They will be watching." "They?" "Your husband, his lawyers, the Sterling Group, maybe the feds. Take your pick." He walked to the door. "Get some rest. You look like hell." And with that, he was gone. The deadbolt clicked shut. I was alone, totally and completely alone for the first time since this nightmare started. The silence was suffocating. I sank onto the sofa. The adrenaline that kept me going was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. I was a fugitive in my own city. I had a fortune in bearer bonds and a fake ID in my bag. A gruff stranger was my only contact, and my husband wanted me ruined. The burner phone in my pocket felt impossibly heavy. I pulled it out, along with my father's letter, and read his words one more time. The truth is more complicated. What did that even mean? A controlled demolition. Was he saying the bankruptcy wasn't entirely real? Or was that just a desperate man trying to give his daughter a shred of hope? I needed a lawyer. I needed a shark. Someone who could go up against Richard's army of corporate attorneys. But how could I afford one? The bonds were my escape hatch. Use them for a legal war against a tech billionaire seemed like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. I turned on the cheap laptop. It booted up to a blank screen. I navigated to the Chicago Tribune website. Our story was at the top of the business section, but it was already old news. The market moves on quickly. The details were just sickening. The sheer scale of the fraud, the powerful investors who were completely wiped out. The SEC was calling it a classic Ponzi scheme. My father was being painted as a charming swindler, a Madoff, for the digital age. And then there was a small mention of me. Moretti's daughter, Elena, is married to tech mogul Richard Sterling. Sterling's office had no comment. Of course they didn't. He was hiding behind his legal team, letting my father and me take the full heat of the public backlash. I made a cup of instant tea and sat at the small table, staring at the brick wall of the building next door. The shock was finally fading, and a cold, hard anger was rising in its place. It felt sharper than sadness, and a lot more useful than fear. Richard, Chloe, Victor Sterling, they had conspired to destroy my father and cast me aside like garbage. They'd turned my life into a chess game, and I'd been a pawn, completely oblivious to their strategy. I would not run. I couldn't. Running would be letting them win. It would mean that everything my father built, no matter how flawed, was gone for good. It meant Richard and Chloe would get to live in my home, spend my family's money, and laugh about the naive girl they so easily broke. No, I opened a new document on the laptop. At the top, I typed, "What I know. Richard's pursuit of me was a planned takeover by the Sterling Group to destroy Moretti Holdings. Chloe was part of it from the beginning.
My father
Suspected, and he created an escape plan for me. This bankruptcy fraud is much more complex than the media is reporting. A controlled demolition." I stared at the words. The list was pitifully short. It was all just speculation and theory, the frantic ramblings of a woman clinging to a cryptic note from her dad. I had zero proof, nothing that would ever stand up in court. I needed real evidence, and I needed to know what actually happened to my father. I picked up the clean phone Silas had left me. I dialed the only number in its contacts. He picked up on the very first ring. "Yeah, it's me. I need 2 things." A moment of silence. "I'm listening. First, I need you to find my father. Is my father in jail? Or has he been released? What's his status?" "He made bail an hour ago. $10 million, secured by what was left of a Cayman trust. He's at the Peninsula Hotel under a false name. The feds have his passport, and he's cooperating to a point." Relief washed over me, so sharp it was painful. He was out. For now he was safe. Can I see him? Bad idea. That hotel is being watched by federal agents and others. A meeting would put a target on both of you. Use the phone he gave you. It's secure. "Now," I said, a new plan already forming. "I need everything you have on Liam Vance. His financials, his business deals, and especially his connection to my father, Robert Sterling. I need to know if he knew my father's company was failing and if he profited from it. I want a paper trail." Leo was silent for a very long time. "You're asking me to dig a very deep, dangerous hole. Men like Croft and Sterling, they hide their secrets in shell companies and foreign accounts. It's expensive to find, and it's not what your dad wanted for you. He wanted you safe and far away from all this." "I'm already neck-deep in it, Leo," I said, my voice cold as steel. "They just haven't decided to shoot yet. So, are you going to help me or not?" Another pause. I could feel him weighing the options. My father's wishes against my raw determination. "I'll make some inquiries." "It's going to take time, and it's going to cost a lot. Those bonds your father left you, a huge chunk of that is gone if you go through with this. Is this how you want to spend your getaway money?" "It's not a getaway fund," I snapped. staring at the cryptic message on the laptop. "It's a war chest." A quiet chuckle came over the phone. "All right then, don't move. I'll be in touch." "And Ilara," he added, "don't do anything stupid." For the next 48 hours, I was a prisoner in that apartment, trapped by my own life. I lived on instant noodles and stale crackers. I watched financial news on a constant loop. I avoided social media like it was poison. Using the secure laptop, I tried my own research. But the corporate records were a labyrinth, designed to confuse anyone. The new phone Leo gave me never rang. My old phone was just a dead weight in my bag, a link to a life that had completely vanished. On the third morning, the silence was broken. Not by Leo, but by the jarring buzz of the burner phone from the safe deposit box. I snatched it up. "Hello?" It was that same digitally disguised voice. "Your father has to speak with you. It isn't safe for him to call you directly. Go to the Museum of Fine Arts, the Huntington Avenue entrance. Be in the Art of the Americas wing, near the Copley painting, at 2:05 p.m. sharp. He'll find you there. You have a 30-second window. Do not be early. Do not be late." "Is he all right?" "He's managing. The situation is always in flux. Be extremely careful. It's possible you're still being watched." The line went dead. I glanced at the clock. 11 a.m. That gave me 3 hours. I showered and dressed in the same clothes I'd had on for days. It was everything I had. I looked at my reflection. My face was pale, with dark smudges under my eyes, but my jaw was tight. I saw a new kind of hardness there, one I didn't recognize. Good. I took $500 from the bond money, a risky but necessary expense, and left the apartment. I walked 10 blocks in the wrong direction, slipped into a CVS, and bought a cheap Red Sox cap and some huge sunglasses. I took the T downtown, changing lines twice to be safe. I emerged into the Boston Common, my heart hammering in my chest. I blended into the lunch hour crowds, making my way towards the museum entrance. At 2:04 p.m., I walked into the cool, quiet majesty of the Grand Hall. It was like a temple of art, enormous and still. Afternoon light poured through the massive windows. I headed for the Art of the Americas wing, my shoes making no sound on the polished floors. The bench he'd mentioned was empty. I sat on the cool wood, my back to the main gallery, facing the vibrant colors of the old painting. My watch clicked over to 2:05. A man dressed as a custodian sat on the bench next to mine, a low partition between us. He didn't look at me once. His cap was pulled way down. He smelled faintly of cleaning fluid and dust. But I knew the shape of his shoulders, the way he held himself. "Dad," I whispered. The word was almost silent. "Don't look at me," he breathed, his voice hoarse and worn out. He made a show of wiping down the wooden bench. "Just listen. We don't have much time. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm safe enough for now." The bail, that was just a performance, a way to show them I'm playing along. "But Ilara, listen to me. This is critical. Julian, he's much more dangerous than you think. He wasn't just my father's hand-picked successor. He was a silent partner. He fed my father bad intelligence, giving the little nudges that made Sterling Dynamics crash exactly when and how he wanted. He shorted our company's stock himself using offshore accounts. He made a fortune from our family's collapse. Hearing him confirm it felt like a punch, even though I already suspected it. "I'm not signing those divorce papers," I whispered, my voice fierce. "I will not give him what he wants." "Good girl, but you need to be smart about this. He's going to get more aggressive. He wants you gone, discredited, and silenced. You're a problem that he needs to get rid of. The cash, the passport, that's your way out. Please, think about using it. Go to Zurich. The key I gave you, the key. The one that opened the deposit box. Dad, with the letter, the cash?" "No," he said, his voice filled with a sudden urgency. "That key is a symbol. It's for the main vault at Valmont Private Bank in Zurich. The number 774 is your code. The bonds and passport are just emergency funds. The real fortune, everything I could salvage, is in there. It's enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. A long, long way from here. A private bank in Switzerland. A secret fortune. It felt like something from a spy thriller. How much? I asked, my mind reeling. Enough that you'll never have to give Julian Croft another thought for as long as you live. But you have to go now. Today, Leo can get you to the airport. You have the passport. Use it. And what about you? I asked, my eyes burning with tears of frustration and anger. You want me to run away and leave you to face this alone? To go to jail? I made this mess, Ilara. I got greedy. I took shortcuts. I thought I was smarter than they were. This is me facing the consequences. But you had nothing to do with any of it. I refuse to let my failures ruin your life. Please, Ilara, for my sake, go to Zurich. I thought of Julian's smug smile, of Sophia's cruel laughter in the parking garage, of a life spent in hiding, always watching my back. No, Dad, I'm not running. He destroyed my life. He destroyed our family. I am going to take every single thing back. My father was quiet for what felt like forever. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Maybe pride, or maybe terror. Then you'll need a weapon. My father, Arthur Sterling, he's the key. He's old school. He keeps paper files on everything important. He doesn't trust digital. He has a study in his Beacon Hill townhouse with a locked drawer in his desk. If there's any proof of his arrangement with Julian, it will be in there. But that house is a fortress, and my father is a ruthless man. He's not like Julian. Julian is a snake. My father is a lion. He will crush you if he even suspects you're a threat to him. Then I'll just have to be smarter, I said, a wild, reckless plan beginning to form in my mind. How can I get in? You can't. It's absolutely impossible. I shouldn't have even said anything. His voice shifted, becoming frantic. My time is up. They're signaling me now. Remember, the key is for Zurich. That is your escape plan. Your only safe move. I love you, sweetheart. Be so careful. He stood up, shoving his cleaning rag into his back pocket. Without looking back, he simply walked away. His shoulders were slumped, just a simple janitor vanishing into the gallery. I sat there for a very long time, the faint scent of ammonia hanging in the air. Zurich meant safety. A golden cage, perhaps, but a safe one. Staying here meant declaring war. A war I was completely unequipped to fight. My cheap burner phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I pulled it out. It was Leo. Yeah, we have a situation, Leo said, his voice low and serious. Your husband. He's done waiting for the courts to handle it. He's making a move. A very public move. What are you talking about? Turn on your laptop, he said. Any news site will do. I left the museum and found a secluded bench in the park. I flipped open the laptop and connected to the public Wi-Fi. I clicked on a live news feed. And there he was, Julian, standing on the steps of Copley Square looking impossibly handsome and serious in a tailored navy suit. A forest of microphones was aimed at his face. Sophia stood slightly behind him to his right. Her face was a perfect picture of supportive worry. She wore a simple yet elegant cream-colored dress. I recognized it immediately. It was one of my dresses from the closet in our penthouse. A hot white rage just seared through me. A reporter shouted a question. Any comment on the rumors that you knew about the Sterling Dynamics collapse, Mr. Croft? Julian held up his hand, the very image of exhausted dignity. I have no comment on any current investigation except to say that I, like all the other investors in Sterling Dynamics, am a victim of a terrible fraud. My heart goes out to everyone who has lost their life savings and their careers. He paused, letting the fake sincerity of his words hang in the air. My only priority right now is my family, and protecting what little normalcy we have left in this awful time. My wife, Ilara, is understandably devastated by her grandfather's betrayal. She is taking the private time she needs to cope with this tragedy. I'm asking the press to please give her that space. My wife. The way he said it turned the words into a threat. Another reporter yelled, "Is it true you've filed for divorce, Mr. Croft?" Julian's face contorted into a perfectly practiced mask of pain. "That is a private family matter. I will only say the personal toll of this ordeal has been immense. My sole focus now is protecting my family and my employees at Croft Development from further harm. Thank you." He turned, draping a possessive arm around Sophia's shoulders as they ascended the courthouse steps, a flawless picture of solidarity. The tragic power couple facing a storm they never asked for. The message was clear. He was the noble husband. I was the unstable, pregnant daughter of a disgraced developer, a mess he was bravely handling. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number, but my gut twisted. I knew exactly who it was. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear and saying nothing. "I see you're not at the penthouse." Julian's voice was a silk-wrapped razor blade, or any of your usual coffee shops. "Hiding out, Elena. It's not a flattering look." "What do you want, Julian? I want you to be sensible. You saw the press conference. The narrative is set. You're the delicate, grieving wife. I'm the devoted husband. We can do this the easy way, or we can make this an absolute catastrophe. Your choice. You had no right to give her that watch." The words were pure acid, a low chuckle. "It's just an accessory, darling. Sophia needed something for the cameras. Besides, it always looked better on her anyway. Now, about our divorce. My patience has run out. The settlement is now $500,000. Take it or leave it. Go to hell, Julian. I am trying to be reasonable here, Elena." But if you're going to make things difficult, he paused, and I could practically hear the condescending smirk in his voice. "Did you honestly believe that ridiculous scarf and sunglasses would fool anyone? The Northgate Senior Living Facility, really? Visiting your dear old dad." A wave of ice washed over me. He'd have followed me, of course he had. His private investigator, or someone new. I'd been so cautious. "Leave my father out of this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Oh, he's in everything, my love. He's the poison that's ruining your whole life. And now, because of your little family chat, the district attorney will be very curious about what secrets the two of you are sharing. Conspiracy is a very ugly charge. He was threatening to frame me as part of my father's real estate fraud." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Don't test me. $500,000, Elena. It's more than you're worth. Sign the papers, and I'll make this whole ugly mess with your father disappear. I know people. I can make sure he gets a comfortable arrangement. Fight me, and I will ruin you both. I'll make sure you burn through every last dollar of Daddy's hidden accounts on lawyers before you're sharing a cell with him." He knew about the accounts. How could he know? Unless he was just fishing, trying to see what I would admit. I said nothing, my heart slamming against my ribs, pure panic screaming through my mind. "I'll take your silence as you finally thinking clearly," he said, his tone shifting into cold, final judgment. "But my offer has an expiration date. You have 48 hours to get out of San Francisco. I don't care where you go, just stay away from me and away from the press. If you're still in this city after that, I will unleash hell." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was dripping with so much contempt it felt like a physical blow. "And tell your father to come get his garbage. I'm done with it. He made this mess. He can clean it up. He can come collect his broken, useless daughter. You're his problem now." The line went dead. I stood frozen right there, looking out over the bay. The sun was shining. Tourists were laughing. The world just kept spinning on. His words just echoed in my head. "Tell your father to come get his garbage, his broken, useless daughter." I was nothing to him anymore. Less than nothing. A piece of trash to be discarded. A problem to be handed off. The rage that had been simmering inside me just evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. This wasn't about saving my marriage or my reputation. This was about survival. This was war. I pulled out the burner phone, the one from the safety deposit box. I didn't hesitate. I dialed the only number stored in its memory. It was answered on the first ring. The distorted voice on the other end was silent. "I'm not going to Zurich," I said, my own voice steady and cold as steel. "Tell my father the plan is off. Tell him I need a different kind of favor now." I ended the call. I looked at the silver key in my palm, the one that promised a quiet escape. Then I slipped it back into my pocket. It wasn't a key to a vault. It was a key to a fight, and I was just getting started. The cold clarity from Julian's call was a drug. Fear was a weakness I could no longer afford. And self-pity was a trap. I had been reduced to a piece of garbage he wanted to throw away, and in that brutal, ugly moment, I found a strange kind of freedom. I had nothing left to lose except the fight itself. I didn't go back to the hotel. If Julian knew about the care facility, the hotel was compromised. I walked north, my mind sifting through options like a burglar planning a heist. My father's warning echoed. They'll be watching. Cain was a shark, but Julian was the python. And the python was in my home. I needed a new base of operations. Somewhere he would never dream of looking. An idea began to form, a desperate and probably reckless one. I used cash from the accounts to buy a prepaid debit card at a convenience store. In a tiny electronics shop, I bought a cheap tablet and a thumb drive. At a thrift store, I found a pair of black jeans, a dark gray hoodie, and some worn-out boots my nude's urban camouflage. I changed in a coffee shop restroom, dumping my designer clothes in the trash. I looked like a student, completely anonymous. Then I went to the one place Julian had legally and permanently banished me from. The storage unit. It was a grim, windowless building down by the shipyards. The kid at the front desk barely glanced up from his phone as he took the paperwork my lawyer had sent. He pointed me toward Unit C-17. The unit was a small concrete box. Inside, stacked with a truly horrifying indifference, were the pieces of my former life. My clothes were shoved into black garbage bags, my shoes in a tangled pile, photo albums, my mother's china still wrapped in newspaper, my art history books, my running shoes. It was a tomb for the person I used to be. Julian hadn't just kicked me out. He'd tried to delete me. My entire life reduced to a few cubic feet of rented space. I didn't have time to grieve. I started digging, not for memories, but for weapons. In a box labeled Home Office, I found my old laptop. It was password protected and probably already wiped by his tech team, but it was a chance. I took it. In another box, I found a small fireproof safe where I kept our important documents. The key was on my old keychain, which Julian now possessed. I used a tire iron from a toolkit, also tossed in a box, to pry the lid open. My old passport, worthless now. My birth certificate, my degree from Stanford, and at the bottom, a small leather pouch. Inside wasn't jewelry, but a silver flash drive. My drive. In our first year of marriage, so full of love and a naive belief in partnership, I'd helped Julian organize his home office. I was the tech-savvy one, with my background in architecture. He'd suggested backing up all his critical files, deeds, trust documents, tax records onto a secure, encrypted drive. Just in case. He'd laughed and called me paranoid, but he agreed. "As long as you hold the key, my love," he'd said, kissing my forehead. I created the encrypted drive myself. The password was the coordinates of the park bench where he proposed. I was such a sentimental fool. Later, as he became more secretive and guarded about his business, I forgot all about it, and he had clearly forgotten he ever gave me this digital master key to his entire empire. My hands were shaking as I plugged the silver drive into the tablet. I typed in the password. The drive opened. A file directory appeared. Clean, labeled folders, tax records, personal, Croft development, property, trusts, correspondence. Cain. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the Cain folder. Most of it was boring stuff, meeting notes, calendar invites. But one file, labeled Project Daedalus, Emo, stood out. Daedalus, from the Greek myth, the master craftsman who built an inescapable labyrinth, a perfect name for a plan to destroy a rival. I opened it. It was a scanned PDF, a memorandum of understanding, not legally binding, but very explicit. It was dated 3 years ago, between Croft Development Holdings, a shell corp, and Kane Industries. The subject, a joint strategic initiative regarding Westwood properties. The language was all corporate doublespeak, but the meaning was crystal clear. The two firms agreed to coordinate market intelligence and mitigate mutual exposure, a secret pact to work together to bankrupt their competitor. It laid out a shell corporation designed for funneling money into ghost projects. The digital signatures belonged to Julian Croft and Elias Kane. It wasn't hard proof of securities fraud, but it was a conspiracy. It proved my husband had been partners with my father's greatest rival for years, long before he ever proposed to me, before he whispered about our future, our family. The encrypted drive felt like a weapon in my hand. This was the key, but it didn't open the final door. It was the blueprint of the crime, not the confession. I needed more. I needed the evidence of the land-flipping schemes my father had warned me about. I copied the financials to the slate and a hidden drive disguised as a cufflink. I wiped the server's history clean. I pocketed the hardware, the proof. As I slid the bookshelf back into its hiding place, my burner phone rang. It was Leo, his voice tight with urgency. "Clara, the plan's off. Your father, he's done waiting. He's on his way to Marcus' penthouse." "What? Why now?" Marcus called him directly, told him to come collect his garbage. My father, he would never let an insult like that stand. A hot, fierce pride flared in my chest. "Where is he going?" "The Sovereign. He's almost there." My blood ran cold. "He can't. It's a setup. Marcus will have him arrested for trespassing. Or worse, Leo. He knows. He doesn't care. He said to tell you. 10 minutes. Be there to watch." "Watch what?" "The beginning of the end," Leo said, and then the line went dead. 10 minutes. The penthouse was a 45-minute nightmare in Midtown Manhattan traffic. It was completely impossible. But my father wasn't a man made idle threats. If he said 10 minutes, he meant it, and he wanted me there as his witness. I slammed the hidden panel shut, bolted from the office, and ran. I flagged down a cab, shoving a wad of cash at the driver. "Park Avenue, the Sovereign. Get me there in 15 minutes, and there's 300 more for you." The cabbie, a tired man whose eyes had seen it all, just grunted and floored it. We tore through the city streets with a vicious purpose that mirrored the storms inside me. I gripped the encrypted slate in my coat pocket like a talisman. 10 minutes. The city blurred into streaks of light. What was his plan? He was out on bond, facing financial ruin. A public fight with Marcus would violate his bail, sending him straight to Rikers. Was this some final, desperate, self-destructive gesture? Or was it something else? The slate felt warm in my hand. Project Nightingale. The taxi screamed to a stop in front of the gleaming tower. I tossed the money onto the seat and jumped out. I bypassed the glittering, absurdly ornate residence entrance and slipped into the service alley out back. I'd used this route 100 times, for early morning jogs or to ditch the press during some long-forgotten scandal. The entry code was still the same, 1104. The date Marcus founded his company. Pathetic, I typed it in. The light flashed green, and the lock clicked open. He never bothered to change it.
The arrogant fool.
I took the noisy, grease-smelling service elevator to the penthouse level. It opened onto a stark, concrete hallway. The private service door to the apartment was right there. Another keypad. I tried the same code. A shrill beep. Access denied. He'd changed this one. I was locked out, separated from the war zone by a single door. But I knew this building's secrets. I'd wasted a year on the co-op board. I knew about the maintenance access hatch on the floor directly below. An old retrofit nobody remembered. I took the service elevator down one floor, found the janitor's closet, and located the panel. The key was long gone, but I'd seen the super pop it open. The lock was flimsy. I used a nail file from my purse, pried it open, and yanked the release. A panel in the ceiling slid back, and a heavy steel ladder descended. I climbed, pushing out into the howling wind 80 stories as above Manhattan. The wind ripped at my clothes. The view was both magnificent and terrifying. I crept to the edge overlooking Central Park and peered straight down. Our penthouse terrace was directly below me, a vast stage of exotic wood and ridiculously expensive furniture. The living room's enormous windows were like a brightly lit aquarium, and I could see them all inside. Marcus was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, his face a perfect mask of rage. His mistress, Isabel, was perched on the sofa, anxiously twisting the strap of her purse, my purse, and then I saw him. My father. He wasn't dressed like a man on trial. He wore a dark, perfectly cut cashmere coat. He stood in the center of the room, absolutely still. His hands were clasped loosely before him. He appeared calm, almost bored. He didn't look like a broken man. He looked like a king, inspecting a trader's fortress and finding it gaudy. Marcus hung up and immediately started shouting, his gestures angry and sharp, but the thick, soundproof glass turned his fury into a silent movie. My father didn't move a muscle. He simply let the tantrum burn itself out. Then my father's lips moved. One short, simple sentence. Marcus's face contorted with even greater rage. He stormed forward, jabbing a finger in my father's face. My father didn't even flinch. He said something else, his expression never changing. This was their final confrontation, but it was not the one Marcus had orchestrated. My father wasn't there pleading for my forgiveness. He wasn't begging for a truce. He was delivering a sentence. I scrambled for my phone, launched the camera, and zoomed in. The picture was shaky, but their faces were perfectly clear. I hit record. Down on the street, something caught my attention. A car. No, not just a car. It was a Rolls-Royce, a long, majestic silver cloud in a deep imperial blue. It pulled to a silent stop under the building's awning. A uniformed chauffeur exited and stood by the door. Then another Rolls-Royce, an identical one, glided in right behind it. And another. A silent, imposing procession of unbelievable wealth. 6 Rolls-Royces in total formed a perfect, threatening line in front of my home. Chauffeurs emerged from each car, standing at silent attention. It was a display of power so audacious, so utterly out of place on a modern New York street, it stole my breath. This wasn't a hired car service. These were artifacts, symbols of a fortune so old and quiet it was immune to market swings and federal investigations. This was my father's response. This was the 10 minutes. Marcus, in the middle of another screaming fit, must have seen my father's eyes shift to the window. He turned, following his gaze. I watched his face transform. The anger dissolved into confusion, then into pure, stunned disbelief. He walked to the window, staring down at the fleet of automotive royalty below. Isabel joined him, her hand shooting to her mouth. My father hadn't shown up in a taxi or the back of an unmarked government sedan. He'd arrived in a motorcade fit for a king. The message was brutally simple. You think I am broken? You think you have won? Look again. My father turned from the window and said one last thing to Marcus. Marcus spun around. His face was now pale with a dawning, horrifying understanding. The script had been completely rewritten. The hunter had just realized he was trapped. My father then glanced at his watch, a simple, elegant Patek, gave a small, dismissive nod, and walked, with unhurried steps toward the penthouse entrance. Not running, not being thrown out, but leaving on his own terms. He didn't look like a man being ejected. He looked like a man concluding a distasteful piece of business. Marcus stood frozen, staring at my father's retreating back, then back down at the Rolls-Royces. Isabel was clutching his arm, saying something, her face a mess of panic. The private elevator doors would be opening now. My father would be stepping inside. The trash had just been collected by a garbage truck made of polished chrome and old money power. I stopped recording. My hands were perfectly steady. The cold rage inside me was gone, replaced by a soaring, almost giddy sense of justice. He'd done it with nothing but brazen, brilliant theater. My father had just rewritten the entire story in the space of 10 minutes. But the cars were never the point. They were the spectacle, the distraction. While Marcus was staring at the cars, while he was reeling from that psychological assault, he wasn't thinking about wiped servers or encrypted slates. I looked down at my phone. I had the video. I had the financials. I had the beginning of my entire case. But as I watched the first blue Rolls-Royce pull away from the curb, a new, more chilling realization washed over me. My father's performance wasn't just for Marcus, it was for me. He told me to be at the window. He wanted me to see that he was not defeated, that the Sterling family name still held immense power, even if it was a different kind of power. He was showing me how to truly fight back. Not in a courtroom, not yet. But in the theater of conflict, he was showing me that perception is a weapon, and spectacle is a form of armor. The last Rolls-Royce disappeared around the corner. The show was finished. Down in the penthouse, Marcus was still at the window. Isabel was trying to pull him away. He shook her off, his face a thundercloud of humiliation and rage. He turned and slammed his fist down on a marble table. The rules had changed. The pathetic, worthless wife he tried to throw away had a father who could summon a fleet of legends. In 10 minutes, that supposedly ruined man showed more raw power than Marcus had built in his entire life. I put the slate back in my bag. The wind on the roof was biting. I looked out over the city that had tried to destroy me. Marcus thought he was calling my father to take out the trash. But Dad didn't come to collect me. He came to send a simple message to prove that the first step in winning a war is to make your enemy doubt his own reality. I climbed back down, my mind already working 3 moves ahead. The performance was over. Now the real war began. I had a piece of the story. I needed all of it. I had to get into Vance's private office. Reaching the service hall, my burner phone buzzed, I answered. The distorted voice was back. The display went as we anticipated. Your father's leverage has been reestablished. Your own situation remains critical. Marcus Thorne is cornered, which will make him furious and unpredictable. A cornered predator is the most dangerous. The safe house is no longer secure. A new one is arranged. I don't need another safe house, I said, my voice low and steady. I need to get inside Edward Vance's townhouse tonight. A long silence crackled over the line. That is extremely ill-advised. The security is state-of-the-art. Vance is there now. The risks are mine, I told him. My father taught me to attack a man's ego. Now I'm going for his bank accounts. Are you going to help me or not? A beat of silence. Then the voice came back, totally flat. There's a charity gala at the Museum of Fine Arts tonight. Julian is a major donor. He'll be there. His wife is away. He will likely return home alone between 10:30 and 11 p.m. His staff has Wednesday nights off. You have a 30-minute window from 11:15 to 11:45 when the house is empty except for Julian, who will be in his second-floor study, probably reviewing acquisitions. The security system is a Vidian Shield Series 7. The code to disable it is 0915. My blood turned to ice. 0915. Leo's birthday, the same code he used for absolutely everything. A true narcissist's tell. How do you know that? Julian is a creature of habit who trusts his inner circle. The code was a foolish gesture of their partnership. Leo and Julian, partners sharing a security code. The sick intimacy of that one stupid detail was more shocking than the entire secret memo. The study door has a physical chub lock. The key will be on Julian. The locked desk drawer is a Malin safe drawer, Model DX. It needs a key and a 4-digit combination. And the combination? We don't have it. You'll need to find it or force it open. The voice turned grim. This operation has zero margin for error, Clara. If you're caught, your father cannot help you. Julian will call the police, and he will absolutely press charges. You will go to jail. Leo will use it to finish the divorce and have you declared mentally unfit. This is your point of no return. I glanced down at my hands. They weren't shaking. Give me the address. The voice gave an address on Beacon Hill, one of the most exclusive blocks in the city. A car will be waiting on the next street over, engine on, from 11:30 p.m. It leaves at 11:46 p.m. Precisely. If you are not in it, you are on your own. Understood. One more thing. The voice hesitated for the very first time. Your father is unaware of this call or this plan. He would forbid it. This is your choice. Your war. I know, I said. Thank you. I ended the call and stood in the grimy service hall, the building's pipes humming around me. I had a few hours. I needed gear. I needed a strategy. I needed to be someone else entirely. I wasn't Clara, the cheated wife. I wasn't Clara, the ruined socialite. For tonight, I had to be a ghost and a thief. The 10 minutes were done. My move. The hours before the gala seemed to stretch on forever. I used cash from my dwindling savings to get a room in a motel near the convention center, paying for a full week to seem normal. The room smelled like bleach and failure, but the door had a lock and the window faced a brick wall. It was perfect. I spent the afternoon getting ready. At a hardware store, I got a flashlight, a cheap set of lock picks that looked ridiculous, a roll of gaffer's tape, and thin latex gloves. At a thrift shop nearby, I found my costume, a simple black dress and a black wool coat, both plain enough to disappear on Beacon Hill. I added a small black clutch. I looked like 1,000 other wealthy, boring women in this city. I looked like no one. As dusk settled, I dressed. I twisted my hair into a tight knot at the base of my neck. Almost no makeup. My mother's diamond studs were the only connection I had to my old life. I put them in my ears, their cold weight a strange comfort. I slipped the tablet and the thumb drive with the files into a protected sleeve and tucked it inside my coat. My only weapons were information and guts. The lockpicks felt impossibly heavy in my clutch. I rode the T to Beacon Hill, stepping out into the cold night air. The gala was a blaze of light a block away. I could see the red carpet, the popping camera flashes, the flood of fancy dresses and tuxedos going up the museum steps. I kept my distance. I circled the block, using the dark side streets, until I reached the address. Julian's Brownstones was an old-world masterpiece, a 5-story limestone fortress on a big corner lot with a wrought iron fence, perfect ivy, and gleaming black shutters. It screamed powerful, untouchable money. Lights were on in the first and second floors. The study, I was told, was on the second floor, the room with 2 tall, thin windows facing a garden. I found a shadowed doorway across the street and prepared to wait. The chill seeped into my bones. Time crawled by. I watched cars dropping people off at other mansions, hearing the city's distant noise. My heart was beating like a trapped bird. This was insane. I was about to break into the house of one of the most powerful and brutal men in Boston. All for what? A digital file that might not even be real, but it was about the principle of the thing. It was about taking something back. Leo had taken my home, my reputation, security. My father, his own way, had taken my innocence. Tonight, I would take something from them. I would steal their secrets. At 10:42 p.m., a dark Range Rover pulled up. A driver in uniform jumped out and opened the back door. Julian Croft climbed out. He was a beast of a man, broad, with a huge mane of white hair and a face like a rock. He wore a tuxedo that looked too small for his shoulders. He didn't look like a supporter of the arts. He looked like a pirate who'd just won the museum in a back alley card game. He walked heavily up the steps, unlocked the front door, and went inside. My countdown began. I waited, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. The staff was gone. Julian would be in his study. He'd pour a drink, check his messages. My window of opportunities was tiny and closing fast. At 11:17 p.m., I crossed the street, my shoes making no sound on the pavement. The block was quiet and still. I slipped through the wrought iron gate, unlocked, thank God, and up the 5 stone steps to the massive black door. My mouth was bone dry. I saw the sleek metal keypad next to the door. Vidian Shield Series 7. I punched in the code, 0915. A soft green light blinked on. A faint click echoed from inside the door. I turned the heavy brass handle. It moved without a sound. The door swung open on perfect hinges. I was in. The foyer was huge. A black and white marble floor like a chessboard sat under a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. A grand staircase swept up into the darkness. The air smelled of lemon polish, old money, and faint cigar smoke. It was unnervingly quiet. I closed the door softly. Less than 30 minutes now. I moved quickly, every nerve firing. The house felt like a museum of things he'd conquered. Suits of armor, dark portraits of dead relatives, glass cases filled with rare artifacts. This was the cave of a man who collected power. I found the study at the end of the second-floor hall. The door was solid oak with an ornate handle, and, just as I'd been told, a serious-looking Chubb deadbolt, locked. This was the first test. I pulled the lockpick set from my clutch, my hands trembling. I had watched videos on it in the motel room. It seemed so simple. Insert the tension wrench, feel for the pins with the pick. I fumbled, the pick slipping. A single drop of sweat rolled down my back. I took a breath, forcing myself to be calm. I tried again. I could feel the tiny metal pins inside. Little obstacles in my way. I probed. I lifted one, clicked. Then another. My entire world shrank to the feeling of cold metal in my gloved fingers, the tiny feedback it gave. The third pin set. The fourth went with a final, satisfying snick. The deadbolt slid back. I turned the knob and slipped into the room, closing the door behind me. Julian's study was a cave of mahogany and leather, with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. A massive desk sat in the center. A gas fire flickered in a huge marble fireplace. The room smelled of leather, peat smoke, and good scotch. On the desk was a half-full glass of amber liquid and a folded Financial Times. And there, built into the antique credenza, was the safe. A flush-mounted panel with a brushed steel finish, completely invisible until you knew where to look. It had a small, glowing keypad. It whispered secrets. I needed the 4-digit code. My husband Leo and his boss Julian shared everything. I prayed they shared this too, our anniversary, 0915. Was it that obvious? Was my husband that predictable, that sentimental? I knelt, my pregnant belly pressing against my dress. I had to try. If I was wrong, if it triggered an alarm, it was over. But I had no other choice. My finger trembled as I reached for the keypad. 915. I hit enter. A sharp, negative beep. A single red light flashed. Wrong. My mind raced. What else? Leo's birthday. 1988. I tried it. 1988. Red light. The year they launched their firm. 2016. Red light again. Julian S. wife died years ago. I didn't know her birthday. A knot of panic tightened in my gut. I was burning time. I scanned the office, desperate for a clue. People always leave a trail. On his desk, beside a glass of whiskey, was a framed photo. A younger Julian Croft, beaming with pride at the helm of a beautiful sailboat, the Ariadne. He was a known sailing fanatic. The shelves were lined with racing trophies. The photo, his weakness. I looked closer. On the silver frame, a small brass plate was engraved. Magdalen College, 2008. The year he and Marcus graduated, a long shot. I punched in 2008, red light. Damn it! Time was running out. My eyes scanned the shelves, law books, finance journals, pristine first editions, and then I saw it. Tucked behind a row of biographies was a thin, worn volume, The Meditations, a cheap paperback. A folded receipt was sticking out as a bookmark from a coffee shop near their old campus. A date was circled, June 4th, 2007, the day their first venture got funded. 4 digits. 0604. My hand was trembling so hard I could barely type. 0604. A soft chime echoed from the wall, a steady green light. A section of the bookshelf hissed and sideways, revealing a hidden vault. The lock had disengaged. A gasp of relief caught in my throat. I pulled the heavy steel door. It swung open silently. Inside was perfectly organized, binders with color-coded tabs. I scanned the labels, my heart pounding in my ears. Thorn Capital, Project Phoenix, and then a single black binder with one word typed in silver, Sterling. My gloved fingers fumbled as I pulled it from the shelf. I laid it on his desk, flicking on my phone's flashlight. It wasn't a file. It was a ledger, handwritten in a sharp, slanted script that was definitely not my husband's. The entries dated back
3.
columns for dates, actions, payouts, and initials. My breath hitched as I read. April 10, MV, confirms prototype failure, AT short stock. July 22, MV leaks quarterly projections, hostile bid prep initiated. MV, Marcus Vance, my husband. Page after page of betrayal. My father's company was being systematically hollowed out from the inside. Marcus wasn't just a partner. He was the saboteur. He had fed Adrian every secret, every corporate weakness. He'd even helped Adrian poach a lead developer from my father's research team. The unexplained failures my dad could never prove, they were all here, documented in black and white. The sums listed in the payout column made me sick. Millions. Next to a transfer for $10 million, a note was scrawled in dark ink. Marcus's new boat. The bastard was funding our life by destroying my family. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, my fingers flying as I opened the camera. I started taking pictures. Page after page, the click of the phone's camera felt like a thunderclap in the silent office. This was it. The absolute evidence, the proof that would send them both to prison. I was on the final page when I heard a sound. The soft chime of the private elevator arriving at his floor. My blood ran cold. I froze, the phone's light still painting a rectangle on the damning page. A car door slammed. Heavy, confident footsteps on the marble floor outside. Adrian. He was home. I shoved the ledger back into the vault, slammed the steel door, and hit the button. The bookshelf slid shut just as I heard a keycard beep at the office door. There was no time to escape, no place to hide. The office was walled with glass on one side, offering a spectacular view of the city and no cover. The only window faced a brightly lit terrace. I did the only thing I could. I dropped to my knees and scrambled under the enormous executive desk, curling into the knee-hole space, pulling my knees up to protect my pregnant stomach. The space was cramped, smelling of cedar and faint cologne. The front door opened. The hall lights flashed on, casting a harsh glare that bled under the desk. His expensive shoes walked into the house. I heard the clink of a glass, the uncorking of a wine bottle. He was walking toward the office. His shoes stopped directly in front of my hiding spot. I held my breath, my heart hammering so violently I was sure he could hear it. I could see the perfect crease in his slacks, the shadow of his body falling over me. He sat down. The expensive leather chair groaned. The desk vibrated slightly. I was inches from his legs. If he stretched, his foot would touch me. He took a long sip of wine. I heard him pick up his desk phone. He dialed a number. "It's done," he said, his voice a low purr of satisfaction. The old man's press conference was a complete rout. A pause. He was listening. To Marcus. I knew it. "No, it changes nothing," Adrian continued. "Your father-in-law is certainly passionate. But passion doesn't stop a bankruptcy court. He's finished. And the girl? Chloe's gone to ground. My man lost her after she left her parents, but she'll surface. They always do. Another pause. I could just make out the faint, tinny buzz of Marcus's voice on the line. Your divorce is the least of my concerns. Adrian snaps to, get it done. Make her sign the papers. If she puts up a fight, we'll bury her with him. We'll leak something. Make her look like part of the conspiracy. The U.S. attorney is a very good friend of mine. She'll break. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice. They were going to frame me. Put me in prison while pregnant with their child. All the proof is right here in this vault, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. The only copy. My insurance. Once her father's ruined and the girl is handled, we'll have a bonfire. A little celebration. Until then, it stays right here. He chuckled, a deep, ugly sound. Safe and sound. Now do your part. I want the final acquisition of their intellectual property filed by Friday. He hung up. He took another slow drink. I heard the soft scratch of a pen on paper. Then complete silence. He was just sitting there. Thinking. A single bead of sweat rolled down my temple. The cramp in my calf was becoming agony. I didn't dare move a muscle. The phone with its damning photos felt like a block of ice in my pocket. A life sentence if he found it. After what felt like hours, he sighed. A heavy, satisfied sound. He pushed his chair back. The leather shoes turned. He stood. He walked away from the desk, over to the bar against the far wall. I heard the glug of more wine pouring into his glass. This was my chance. While his back was turned, I had to go. Slowly, painfully, I began to uncurl myself from under the desk. Every rustle of my coat, every scrape of my shoe on the floor sounded like a scream in the quiet room. I made it to my hands and knees. Peeking out, I saw Adrian at the bar, his back to me, staring out the window at the city. I rose into a low crouch. The doorway was 15 feet away. It might as well have been a mile. I took one careful step. A floorboard under the expensive rug let out a loud, piercing creak. Adrian went perfectly still. I could see his reflection in the dark glass of the window. His head cocked slightly. Listening, I froze, a statue made of pure terror. He didn't turn around. I know you're there, he said, his voice calm, almost bored. The security system is silent. It sends an alert to my phone if the office is entered after I've armed it. My blood turned to ice. It was a setup. The whole thing. The quiet house, the unlocked door a setup. And like a fool, I walked right in. Slowly, he turned around. He held his wine glass in one hand. In the other, he held a small black pistol, the barrel pointing directly at me. It looked like a natural extension of his hand. I was expecting a private detective, maybe one of your father's pathetic lawyers. His cold eyes swept over me, taking in my dark coat, my panicked expression. Then his gaze dropped to my stomach, to the obvious swell of my pregnancy. A slow, cruel smile twisted his lips. But you, the loving pregnant wife, I have to admit I'm impressed. Incredibly foolish, but impressed. I couldn't speak. My mind was a roaring void of... Is that your phone? He asked, taking a step closer. Empty your pockets. Put everything on the desks. Slowly, I laid my small toolkit on the desk. The flashlight, the burner phone, the case with my pics. He gestured with the gun. Your real phone now. I slid my phone next to the burner. Now the coat. Take it off. Throw it over here. I shrugged off my coat, the chill of the room hitting me instantly. I tossed it toward him. It landed by his feet. He never looked down. His eyes were locked on me. You came for the ledger, didn't you? Marcus said you were getting bold. I told him you were just a pampered princess. Seems I misjudged the famous sterling fire. He stepped closer. The gun was now just 6 feet away. Unlock your phone.
What's the code?
I froze. If he saw those pictures, Chloe, either you give me the code or I shoot you in the leg and then call an ambulance. You'll be arrested from a hospital bed. How's that for a headline? My finger trembled as I typed in the simple password. The home screen appeared. The last app I de-used was the camera. The thumbnail of the last photo A clear shot of the ledger detailing a massive offshore payment to Marcus was sitting right there. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Bring it here." I picked up the phone, my legs feeling like they would buckle. I took 2 steps toward him and held it out.
As he reached for it,
With his free hand, his eyes dropped to the screen. I saw my opening. It wasn't a plan. It was survival. It was pure instinct. I didn't give him the laptop. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had. Not at him, but at the whiskey glass in his other hand. The laptop's metal edge hit the crystal perfectly. It exploded. Bourbon and glass sprayed everywhere. Marcus roared in shock and pain, stumbling back as his gun hand dropped. I ditched the laptop and dove. Not for the pistol, but for the one thing I could reach the heavy decanter on the bar. I grabbed it, spun, and swung. It connected with the side of his skull with a horrible, wet crack. Marcus Thorne's eyes rolled white. He deflated like a punctured tire. The gun hit the hardwood floor with a clatter. He collapsed right after it, his body hitting the ground so hard the floorboards groaned. I stood there over him, the decanter still gripped in my hand, trying to catch my breath in panicked, ragged gulps. He was completely unconscious. A thin line of blood was already seeping from his temple, mixing with the spilled bourbon on the antique rug. I'd actually done it. I knocked out Marcus Thorne. The idea was too huge to process. I had to go. I grabbed my coat, the burner phone, and my purse. I left the laptop. It was a trap. The photos were likely in the cloud, but I had no time. I picked up the pistol from the floor. It felt cold and foreign in my hand. I shoved it deep into my coat pocket, and then it hit me, the ledger, the proof, the whole reason I was even there. I ran to his desk, my fingers fumbling on the security lock. 3695. The drawer hissed open. I took the entire Avalon Initiative folder, shoving it into my coat's deep inner pocket. I slammed the drawer closed. I took one last look at Thorne, a massive heap on the floor. He was starting to groan, his fingers twitching. He would be up soon. I ran. I flew down to the sweeping staircase, through the cold marble hall, and shot out the front doors, not even stopping to close them. I hit the street running, my heels clicking on the dark pavement. I rounded the corner onto Lakeshore Drive. And there it was, a dark SUV idling at the curb, its exhaust a white puff in the freezing night air. The back door opened as I ran towards it. I threw myself inside. Go, now. The vehicle was already moving, lurching into traffic before my door was even closed. I struggled to pull it shut, collapsing against the leather seat, my entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable shivers. Alex was behind the wheel. He didn't meet my eyes in the mirror. "You're bleeding." I glanced down at my hands. They were scratched from the broken glass and flecked with Marcus's blood. "It's not mine." "The file?" I patted the thick folder inside my coat. "I've got it." "And the house?" Marcus was there. I had to use a decanter. "He's unconscious." For the first time, Alex's calm facade broke. His eyebrows shot up. "You knocked out Marcus Thorne?" He didn't sound scared, just strangely impressed. Wow, the old man is going to have a heart attack when he hears. "Where are we going?" I asked, the adrenaline dump suddenly making me feel sick. "Somewhere safe, somewhere you can clean up, and where we can see exactly what you risked your life for." He glanced at me again, his eyes stopping on the outline of the gun in my coat pocket. "And you can explain why you're now carrying a firearm." I leaned my head back, watching the city lights of Chicago smear into long streaks. I did it. I got the evidence. I fought back. But as the shock wore off, the real consequences started to sink in. I assaulted Marcus Thorne in his own mansion. I stole his property. He was going to wake up. He'd know it was me. He practically owns the Chicago PD. He has the state's attorney on a leash. This whole war wasn't just a figure of speech anymore. It was suddenly very, very real, and I had just thrown the first punch that drew blood. The 10-minute robbery was over. The heist was complete. Now, the backlash was coming. The somewhere safe was a private terminal at DuPage Airport, a world away from a cheap motel. We didn't go to a hangar, but a quiet, sleek building labeled Executive Aviation. Inside, it was like a five-star hotel lobby, with plush carpets, modern art, and ridiculously expensive chairs. A door marked Conference Room B opened into a small, plain room with a table, some chairs, and an industrial shredder in the corner. It was the kind of anonymous room where terrible deals get signed. "Wait here," Alex said. "Don't touch anything. I'll get a medical kit." I collapsed into a chair, the full weight of the night just crushing me. I put the thick file on the polished table. The Avalon Initiative label seemed to pulse with a dark light. I pulled Thorne's pistol from my pocket, handling it like a venomous snake, and set it beside the file, the two souvenirs from my new life of crime. Alex returned with a small first aid kit. He didn't say a word, just took my hand and started cleaning the small cuts with an antiseptic wipe. The sting was sharp, and it snapped me back to the present. "He's awake by now," I said, my voice hollow in the silent room. "He will have called the police. He'll have told them my name." "Probably," Alex said, his touch surprisingly gentle. "But he isn't going to get the response he wants. Not immediately. Why not? He's Marcus Thorne, because the silent alarm in his study wasn't just wired to his security company. It was routed through a private firm. One your father has a close relationship with. The 911 call from his address was automatically held and rerouted. The first cops there will be told it was a system malfunction, a false alarm. They'll write a quick report and leave. Thorne will be furious, but he'll have zero proof you were there. Not for now. He'll have a splitting headache and a story that no one will believe without any evidence. A debutante breaking into his mansion and attacking him with a liquor decanter? It's going to sound like he was drunk and imagined the whole thing." I just stared at him. The sheer level of foresight, of contingency planning, was insane. "My father arranged all this. Your father prepares for everything. And he always has an insurance policy." Alex finished bandaging my hand. "Now, let's see what you bought with all that risk." I opened the folder containing the handwritten ledger. I laid the pages out on the table. Alex pulled over a chair, his intense eyes scanning the entries. He was quiet for a very long time, his finger tracing the lines, the dates, the coded initials, the dollar figures. His face grew darker with every single page he turned. "This is it," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "This is conspiracy to commit massive financial fraud. Wire fraud, racketeering. It looks like Bennett wasn't just a source. He was a full partner. This ledger proves he was directing the entire operation, laundering all the profits." He pointed to an offshore account number. "That's extremely bad. It establishes a clear motive, a premeditated crime. This isn't just business, it's personal. And it is very, very illegal." "Will it be enough?" I asked, the lawyer in me taking over. "It's all handwritten. There's no digital trail. They could just claim it's a forgery. It was in Thorne's safe, in his private studies. And we have people who can place Bennett and Thorne together constantly. The memo from your drive lays out the plan. This," he said, tapping the ledger, "fills in all the dirty little details. It's a perfect roadmap for any prosecutor. But even better, it's leverage, the kind of blackmail that can topple an entire empire." "So what is our next move?" The question hung in the still air of the room. The obvious answer was to call the authorities. But the authorities, as Thorne himself loved to boast, were in his pocket. Could we possibly trust them? We do nothing with it. A new voice came from the doorway. "Not yet." I spun around, and there he was. My father. He looked years older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes etched deeper, but he stood tall. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and slacks, not his usual power suit. He looked like a man who had finally dropped his guard. His eyes met mine first, checking me for injury. then filling with a relief so intense it made my own throat tighten. Then his eyes fell to the ledger on the table and to the gun sitting next to it. His face hardened. "You went to Thorne's house." It wasn't a question. His voice was soft, but it trembled with a controlled fury I had never heard him aim at me. "You told me not to," I said, meeting his gaze, my own defiance sparking against his anger. "You told me to hide in Geneva. You held a party to distract me, but you never gave me a weapon. So I went out and got one for myself. I gave you a way to stay alive." He shot back, stepping fully into the room. A safe, clean exit, far from this mess. Not a way to get yourself murdered, breaking into the mansion of a man who would snap your neck and call it a terrible accident. "What were you thinking, Chloe? This wasn't some game, that drive." I pointed a trembling finger at it. If they had found that on me, my God. I did what I had to, I snapped, getting to my feet. Liam had a file on me. He was setting me up. Dad, he and Damien, they were going to plant evidence, make me look like an accomplice, and send me to prison. What was I supposed to do? Run off to some island and read about my own indictment online? The ugly truth filled the space between us. My father shut his eyes, a pained look on his face. When he opened them again, the anger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. I failed you completely. You created this monster, and you left me here to deal with him. You didn't leave me alone, I said, my voice shaking. You left me a way out. You left me Ethan. You came to the penthouse. You showed me everything. I struggled for the words. You showed me the theatrics of it all. The power of making a big move. Well, this is my move. I slammed my hand on the stack of documents. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. Not anymore. My father looked at me with a new kind of respect in his eyes. He gave a slow nod, like he was accepting this inevitable. Fine. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and stared at the papers. Then we fight, but we fight smart. We use the truth. The whole truth. He glanced at Ethan. Is the room secure? Swept an hour ago. Jammers are active. We a ghost. My father took a long breath. The bankruptcy, the fraud accusations, it's all real, Chloe. The losses are real. I pushed out buggy code. I faked user metrics to get new funding rounds to pay off old investors. It's the oldest sin in the tech world. I was arrogant. I thought I could innovate my way out of the mess. My stomach dropped. So that was it. The simple, ugly truth. But he went on, his voice growing stronger. This wasn't just one bad quarter. I was being targeted in a calculated, coordinated corporate assault. Leo, with Marcus as his mole, was running a sabotage campaign on Vance Holdings. They launched DDoS attacks. They filed bogus patent lawsuits to stall our product launches. They lobbied regulators to block our acquisitions. They planted negative stories in the tech press. They poached my best engineers. They manufactured a server crisis. They forced me into a position where I had to cut corners. He pointed to the drive. This is the complete log of that assault. They didn't just capitalize on my failure. They engineered it. They are the direct cause of the fraud the SEC is investigating. I'm guilty of bad judgment and desperation. They are guilty of malice, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. The world tilted on its axis again. This wasn't a simple story of a failed CEO. This was a story of a war of a king being toppled by a vicious, deliberate siege. Why did you tell anyone? The SEC? The FBI? And say what? My father's laugh was harsh, that the big bad wolves were cheating without a shred of proof? It sounds like the whining of a sore loser. This drive is the proof, but I couldn't get my hands on it. Leo kept it as leverage over Marcus, or maybe just as a trophy. My only option was to force their hand, to let them believe they had won. The bankruptcy filing, I said, as it all clicked into place. A controlled demolition. He nodded. I knew the indictment was coming. The investigation was going to happen no matter what, so I steered it. I filed for Chapter 11 to freeze all the assets and bring the snakes into the light. I gave up control to a court-appointed trustee because a trustee has powers I lost. The power to issue subpoenas to investigate every party involved, not just Vance Holdings. I took the public humiliation, the reputational hit, to create a contained battleground where the entire truth could be exposed. It's a Hail Mary, a final, desperate gamble. I just stared at him, feeling both awe and horror. He'd sacrificed his name, his fortune, his own freedom, all as a strategic play in a much bigger war. And that surprise product launch, the 10-minute keynote theater. Just as you said, he admitted with a faint, exhausted smile. But it was necessary theater. I had to show Marcus, and more importantly, show you, that I wasn't finished, that the Vance name still had power, even if that power was just a ghost project. I had to make Marcus second-guess himself, to make him panic. A panicked man makes mistakes. And he looked right at me, his eyes gentle for a moment. I had to remind you whose daughter you are. You not a victim. You a Vance. We don't a break. The pieces were all crashing into place, forming a terrifying but thrilling picture. So what next? We take this to the district attorney? Not yet, my father said, his expression turning sharp, calculating. The old Arthur Vance, the ruthless dealmaker, was back. We have the drive. They have no idea we have it. Right now, Leo is furious and confused, but he still thinks he's in control. And Marcus is arrogant, thinking he's about to get rid of you forever. We have the element of surprise, and we are going to use it. How? We set up a meeting, a negotiation for the divorce. I blinked. What? After all this, you want me to negotiate with him? I want you to make him an offer he could never accept while wearing a wire, with the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois listening to a live feed. The sheer nerve of it stunned me. You can arrange that? The trustee managing the bankruptcy is a former federal judge, Eleanor Prentice. She is famously independent, incredibly thorough, and she deeply despises Leo Sterling because of a tech deal that went bad in the 90s. I've already had a preliminary off-the-record chat with her. She is very open to new evidence that would help in the fair administration of the estate, especially evidence of a conspiracy to illegally devalue it. She has contacts in the Public Integrity Unit. They would be extremely interested in a case as about a plot to manipulate the market and defraud investors, especially one involving a billionaire and a tech celebrity. It was an incredibly bold and dangerous plan, using the divorce, my own personal devastation, as bait for a federal sting operation. He will never agree to meet me. Not after our fight, not after your visit. He'll only speak through his lawyers. He'll meet, my father said with cold certainty, because the offer will be for his silence, and it will come from your new lawyer. My new lawyer? The conference room door opened once more. A woman in her late 50s entered with a sleek, dark bob, sharp, intelligent eyes, and an air of calm, unshakable authority. She wore a perfectly tailored white pantsuit. I knew who she was instantly from the Chicago Tribune and Society blogs. Serena Croft, known as the Shark. She was the most feared divorce attorney in Illinois, a legal killer who represented the super rich in battles where the money was obscene and the secrets were devastating. She was known for being selective, incredibly expensive, and completely unbeatable. "Miss Vance," she said. Her voice was cool and smooth. "A pleasure, considering the situation. I'm Serena Croft. I'll be your counsel." I was floored. "How? I owe your father a favor," she said simply, placing a slim leather briefcase on the table, a very large one. "And I can't stand Marcus Thorne. He's a smug, misogynistic bully who thinks his money makes him a god. I've been waiting for a chance to bring him down to earth. This should be fun." She opened her briefcase and took out a single sheet of paper. "This is a proposed settlement. The terms are as follows. You agree to a no-fault divorce. In return, Mr. Thorne will immediately transfer the clear title to the penthouse overlooking Millennium Park to you, debt-free. He will also wire $50 million from his personal accounts to you as a single lump sum payment. In exchange, you will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, forever giving up your right to discuss your marriage, your father's company, or anything you know about Mr. Thorne's business dealings. I nearly laughed out loud. It was insane. So audacious it was insulting. He will never, ever agree to that. It's a joke. Of course it is, Serena said, a razor-thin smile on her lips. That's the entire point. It's an opening bid so outrageous, it will make him furious. He'll demand a meeting, just to laugh in your face, to put you in your place, to prove he's still the one in charge. He'll want to watch you squirm. He'll want to savor his win. And that's when the trap closes. The wire, I said. Exactly. We'll hold the meeting right here, in this secure building. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be monitoring from a remote location. You will be wearing a device. You will provoke him. You will mention the drive, the sabotage, Leo. You will show him a copy of one of the most damning emails from the drive. You'll accuse him of conspiring to ruin your father. You will give him every opportunity to incriminate himself. Knowing Marcus, his arrogance will handle the rest. And if he doesn't fall for it, if he's smart, Serena's smile never flickered. Then we move to Plan B. We leak the drive's contents to the Chicago Sun-Times. We file a civil RICO lawsuit against Thorne and Leo, using the drive as the primary evidence. We start a media firestorm that will destroy his reputation and cripple his company. The criminal charges will inevitably follow. He loses either way. This meeting is just the faster, more personally satisfying option. I looked over at my father. He gave me a slight nod. Your call. This was the moment. The turning point. I could take the crypto wallet and clean passport and just disappears. Or I could walk into that room with a wire and a script and try to destroy the man who broke me. It wasn't really a choice at all. When? I asked, my voice now firm. Isabella glanced at her watch. My office will contact his lawyer this afternoon. The offer has already been sent. Considering the situations and Marcus' massive ego, he'll demand to see you in person by tomorrow. We need to get you prepared. We have to script your every word, plan your every reaction. We need to turn you into the perfect trap. She looked at my simple dress, my exhausted eyes, the faint bruise on my wrist. First, let's get you into an outfit that screams grieving daughter, not greedy. Wife. Ethan, the safe house is prepped, my father said. I've already laid out some clothes. I stood up. The weight of the plan, the baby, the bracial. It was a breakthrough. For the first time since my brother's breakdown, I wasn't just treading water. I finally had my hands on the weapon, and it was aimed directly at the man who ruined him. Daniel sat up, coming over to me and putting his hands on my shoulders, his grip still shaky. You don't have to do this, Clara. We could just go back to Portland. Live a quiet life, a safe one. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of a genius who nearly lost his mind. You didn't teach me to play it safe, Danny. You taught me to build things. A weary, proud smile touched his lips as he pulled me into a tight hug. Then go burn his kingdom to the ground. I followed Evelyn and Leo from the apartment, leaving the ghost drive and the server key on the table as evidence for the prosecutor's office. I finally understood what Daniel had been trying to teach me all these years. The patents weren't the power. The venture capital wasn't the power. The power was the will to expose a lie. It was holding the devastating truth in your own two hands. The power was turning your deepest wounds into a carefully laid trap. The last week was just the setup. The real show was about to begin. The safe house was a sterile condo overlooking the Seattle waterfront. The clothes they picked for me were a new kind of armor, a simple, sharp charcoal dress, a silk scarf, and plain black heels. No jewelry, not even the ring he gave me. The look was calm, focused, and completely unreadable. It was the uniform of a woman who was done grieving and was now in the cold, precise business of consequences. Evelyn drilled me for 3 solid hours. We sat at a chrome table, the drive and her notes between us, like blueprints for a demolition. "Forget how you feel," she said, her voice like ice. "The rage, the betrayal, the heartbreak that is all ammunition for him. He will use it against you. He will call you crazy, gaslight you, and throw every insecurity you've ever had in your face. Your only emotions are cool disappointment and total certainty. You are not there to ask for anything. You are there to state the terms of his surrender." She had me memorize the entire script. I was to be poised, direct, and absolutely immovable. The scene is the mediation room. You're already there, at the head of the table. He walks in expecting tears. You don't stand. Your opener is, "Marcus, thanks for making the time. Have a seat." Then you say, "I've reviewed your proposal. It's offensive, so I've drafted a more appropriate one." You slide the new terms of dissolution across the table. When he loses his temper, you say, "This is not a negotiation, it's a choice. You can sign this, and your divorce and your criminal theft of my brother's intellectual property can remain a private affair. Or you can refuse, and I will file this." You then slide the evidence summary next to the new terms. With the U.S. Patent Office, the SEC, and the Attorney General's Office, by the end of business today, the full server logs detailing your conspiracy will be sent to the press next. The key phrases are intellectual property theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You never say you destroyed my brother. You say you executed a multi-year conspiracy to steal proprietary source code from a competitor. This is about his crimes, not your pain. If he threatens you, you say, "Any attempt to intimidate me or my brother will be documented as witness tampering and obstruction of justice." For my own safety, this entire conversation is being recorded. That's the key. Mentioning the recording, even as a bluff, will either silence him or his ego will make him dig his own grave even deeper. Right on tape. We practiced it again and again. I rehearsed the flat, steady voice, the slow way as it would place the documents on the table, how to keep my hands perfectly still. Evelyn was a merciless director. Less anger. You're presenting a quarterly report. That's better. Don't lean forward. You are not asking. You are informing. During a short break, Leo came in with a tiny piece of tech, a microphone disguised as a modern silver brooch. He carefully pinned it to my dress. "It's voice-activated," he said quietly. "Crystal clear audio. Entire floor is covered. The federal team is in the office right next door. They'll hear every single word. An armed U.S. Marshal is in this room, behind that privacy glass." He gestured to a large, dark pane of glass on the wall that I thought was just a design feature. "For your protection. If he so much as raises his voice too loud, she'll be through that door in under a second." "Will he be armed?" I asked, his explosive temper a vivid memory. "He'll be scanned by building security in the lobby. It's protocol for this floor. He'll be clean." But Clara Leo met my gaze. "The most dangerous weapon he has is his knowledge of you. He will aim for your weakest point. Your job today is to have no weak points." At 3:15, Evelyn's burner phone buzzed. She answered, listened for a moment, and said, "Acknowledged," before hanging up. "He's on his way up. Our source just confirmed. Marcus will be here at 4. He's coming alone. No attorneys. He apparently told his team he wanted to handle his emotional, pregnant wife himself." A small, sharp smile touched her lips, his ego. It's always their greatest vulnerability. The last few minutes were surreal. I was dressed for battle, prepared for sound, and I knew all my lines. I sat alone in that conference room, studying my reflection in the dark glass. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She was cold, composed, and ready. The ghost of the wife who broke down in her brother's apartment was gone. At 3:58, the door opened. Marcus strode in. He looked, as always, like a king. An obscenely expensive black hoodie, designer jeans, a casual confidence that screamed he owned the world. He scanned the simple room with a dismissive air, as if its lack of extravagance was an insult. His eyes finally landed on me. He was expecting, I'm sure, to see me shattered, someone broken by the last few months, pale with grief, with pleading eyes. He did not see her. His smirk wavered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of confusion he quickly masked with that familiar arrogance. "Clara," he said, staying by the door. "You look, well, I'm impressed. I figured you'd be at some wellness retreat by now, trying to meditate your family's tragic little failure away. Cool disappointment." I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Marcus, thank you for coming. Please, sit." He hesitated, thrown by the calm, by the authority in my voice. He shut the door and took the seat, leaning back with his arms crossed. A perfect portrait of condescending power. "So, Evelyn Reed, that's a bold move. Must be costing you. I hope your brother's last few dollars are covering her retainer. Then again, I hear she takes some very creative payment arrangements these days. I wonder what you had to promise her." I let the insult hang in the silent room. I placed my hands flat on the cool surface of the table. "I've reviewed your settlement offer." "It is insulting," he actually laughed. "Insulting? Honey, it's a fortune. $2 million to walk away from a marriage that was, let's be honest, an investment, and one that's no longer paying off. You should be grateful." "I'm here to offer you an alternative," I said, my voice perfectly level. I slid Evelyn's single-page term sheet across the table. He picked it up, his gaze flicking over it, the smug look on his face dissolving, then twisting into pure disbelieving fury. He read it again, his knuckles turning white as he clenched the paper. He stared at me, his face a mask of cold rage. "Are you insane? Is this a sick joke? 51% of the company? All patents and intellectual property revert to him? Has the stress of the last few months finally made you lose your mind?" "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice steady, feeling the strength in the rehearsed words. "It is a choice. You can sign, and our divorce, along with your conspiracy with Serena, can be resolved privately. Or you can refuse, and I will file this." I slid the printout from the ghost drive to rest beside the term sheet. "With the SEC and the U.S. Attorney. Before the markets open tomorrow. The complete server logs detailing your theft will be next." The blood drained from his face. He stared at the printout, at the familiar file names, the damning timestamps. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-jawed shock. What is this? Where did you get this?" "Where I got it is irrelevant. What matters is that it's all there. A detailed log of your 2-year plan with Serena to steal my brother's work. Intellectual property theft to launch your company. Wire fraud. Conspiracy." He shot to his feet, the chair clattering loudly behind him. "You have no idea what you're doing. This is nothing. It's fake. It's forged. And your brother's sad little attempt to blame me for his own failure." I didn't flinch. I just sat in my chair looking straight up at him. "Is that why there's a file on the server named Project Echo, Marcus? Is that the accounting for Serena's bonuses?" The question landed like a physical blow. He actually staggered back a step. He knew that I knew. That one specific, sordid detail was enough to demolish his composure. He expected a weeping, pregnant wife making empty threats. He did not expect the woman who held the blueprints to his entire lie. His shock curdled into a vile, targeted rage. He slammed both fists on the table, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. I could smell the expensive soap I bought him. Now it just smelled of deceit. "You stupid," he hissed, the charming tech genius persona gone, revealing the predator underneath. "You think you can blackmail me? You have absolutely nothing. That server, if it even exists, is something you will never see again." And this, he snatched the term sheet from the table, ripped it into pieces, and threw them down like confetti, is garbage. My lawyers will have you declared mentally incompetent. I'll take the baby. I'll bury your brother in so many countersuits he'll wish he'd never even met you. This was the moment. Any attempt to intimidate me or to use my pregnancy against me will be considered witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I spoke, my voice firm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I glanced at a glass-scale model of his new tower, then back at him. Just so we're clear, this whole conversation is being recorded. His eyes followed my gaze. First came understanding, then a flash of raw, violent anger. He let out a harsh, ugly laugh. Recorded? Are you insane? That's completely illegal, you fool. My legal team will tear you apart for this. It's inadmissible. You just broke the law. I'm not the one facing federal charges, Marcus, I said, my tone finally turning to ice. The recording is just for my protection. The real proof is in that portfolio. And with the city inspector you and Leo paid off. What was his name again? Oh yes, Ramirez. His entire tough guy facade just collapsed. Ramirez. I had pulled a name from his secret accounts. Proof I knew everything. You're bluffing, he snarled, but the threat was hollow. It sounded more like a desperate prayer. Am I? I reached into the leather case on the table. Not the whole file, just one sheet of paper. I pulled out a clear, color printout of a wire transfer. It plainly showed the payment to Ramirez, with Marcus's own initials on the authorization line. I pushed it across the polished desk. He stared at it. All the color drained from his face. He saw his own signature, the damning numbers. His hands began to tremble. He was a man watching his whole world burn down. Where? He whispered. How did your partner has a very casual approach to digital security, I said. And you have a pathetic habit with passwords. May 18th? Seriously, Marcus? The day you broke ground on the Thorn Tower? You use it on every single account. It's just sad. The final insult. His own ego, the date of his crowning achievement, was now the key to his ruin. That broke him. The rage surged back, but this time it was the fury of a cornered animal. He lunged across the desk, not at me, but at the paper, trying to sweep it to the floor. It's nothing, he screamed. It's worthless. It's the ramblings of a bitter old man and his pregnant, unhinged wife. No one will believe you. I am Marcus Thorne. I practically built this city. You're a nobody. He was shouting now, spit flying from his mouth, his perfect hair falling into his eyes. This was the real him, the monster I'd been living with. Your power is a joke, Marcus, I said, standing up to meet his fury with my own cold calm. It was built on fraud and on my family's ruin, and all of it ends right now. You have one choice. Sign these papers, hand back my family's company, and walk away with your freedom. Or you can fight me, and I will use every page in this file to make sure you spend the next decade in a federal prison. Your powerful friends won't take your calls from inside FFCI Miami. He just stared at me, breathing hard, his eyes wild a trapped man with no way out. The full scale of the trap was finally dawning on him. The hidden microphone, the agents waiting, the ledger, the wire transfer. And then, something inside him shifted. The fury didn't disappear. It just got quiet and cold. It morphed into something far more dangerous. A cruel, calculating look entered his eyes. He slowly straightened his tie, a pathetic attempt to regain his composure. You know, he said, his voice now a low, venomous hiss. There's always a third option. I just stood there, watching him, silent. We could just call this whole thing a mistake. He took a single step closer to me. I didn't even flinch. You drop this, all of this. You sign my settlement. You take the payout. You move to London. And I make sure your family's companies doesn't get wiped out in bankruptcy court. I have friends in the right places. I can get them a bailout, a government loan, a sweetheart deal. They'd be back in business before your baby arrives. You can give them their legacy back. All it will cost you is your pride. And this? He waved a dismissive hand around the room. This childish little quest for revenge. He was offering me a deal with the devil, my family's future, in exchange for my silence. It was a brilliant, wicked move. It targeted the one soft spot he knew I still had, my loyalty to my family. I felt my lawyer's strict instructions begin to evaporate. This was not in the plan. This was personal. My justice, or my family's last chance to recover everything they had lost. I looked at this man, this monster, who knew exactly how to make me hurt, and all I saw was a desperate gambler making one final, pathetic bet. "You don't have that kind of pull anymore, Marcus," I said, and I heard the absolute conviction in my own voice, because by the time you leave this office, you won't have a story to sell. The Miami Herald will. The U.S. Attorney's Office will. Your friends at City Hall will be too busy shredding documents to even remember your name. You have nothing to offer. You are bankrupt of money, of influence, and of time. The cruel spark in his eyes died, replaced by a hollow, bottomless fear. He knew I was right. He had nothing left to play. The private elevator to the office chimed. The doors slid open. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 40s, with a no-nonsense look, and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a dark pantsuit with an FBI badge clipped to her belt. Two stone-faced men in cheap suits stood right behind her. "Marcus Thorne," the woman said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Marcus spun around. "Who the hell are you?" "Special Agent Diaz, FBI Economic Crimes Division." She held up her badge for him to inspect. "We've been listening to this conversation. We have a few questions for you about the Thorne Tower permits and your partner, Leo. You're not under arrest. Not at this moment. But we do need you to accompany us to our field office for a formal interview." Marcus just stood there, paralyzed, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the agent to me to the damning wire transfer still sitting on his desk. The reality of 3 federal agents in his private office hit him like a physical blow. You can't do this." "I want my lawyer," he stammered out. "Of course," Agent Diaz said, completely unmoved. "You can call him from the car. He can meet us downtown. Now, if you'll please come with us." One of the other agents took a step forward, a clear, silent message that this wasn't a request. Marcus Thorne's shoulders just slumped in defeat. The fight was gone. He moved like a puppet with its strings cut. He never once looked back at me. He just shuffled out of his own office between the 2 agents, a dethroned king being escorted from his palace. The elevator doors slid shut behind them. The silence in the penthouse office was absolute. I sank slowly into a leather chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The wave of adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour receded, leaving me exhausted and trembling. The elevator chimed again. My lawyer, Isabel, walked in, followed by my older brother, Alex. His face was tense, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, triumphant pride. "You are magnificent," Isabel said, and I could finally hear genuine admiration in her voice. "That offer he made about your family's company, that was a desperate move. Your response was flawless. You didn't even hesitate. You dismantled him." "He's not arrested?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. "Not yet," Alex said. He came and stood beside my chair, putting a steadying hand on my shoulder. "They'll question him for hours, show him a fraction of the evidence we gave them. Then they'll offer him a deal. Testify against his partner, Leo, for a reduced sentence. He'll take it. Men like him always save themselves." The goal was never just to stop Marcus. It was to use him to tear down the whole corrupt enterprise. "The U.S. Attorney is already prepared to review your family's bankruptcy case," Isabel added. This new evidence provides from crush context. It proves they were victims of corporate sabotage and extortion. It doesn't undo the damage, but it rewrites the entire narrative. The court's decision, it's going to be very different now. There's a strong chance of getting the whole thing overturned. The objective is no longer survival. It's about getting justice. Justice. It was a word I hadn't let myself think about in years. My brother spoke up. The car is downstairs. We should go before word gets out that Marcus Thorne was just taken in by the feds. You need to disappear for a while. I just nodded, found a new reserve of strength, and got to my feet. I looked around the office, the overturned chair, the papers on the floor, the war room. It was finally truly over. The lies, the betrayal, the constant anxiety of living with Marcus Thorne. But as I followed them out, a new feeling began to settle in my chest, something warmer than revenge. It was peace. Not the peace of giving up, but the peace of a final, clean ending. The peace of seeing that monster for the weak, terrified man he really was. The peace of winning the only fight that ever really mattered, the one for my own future. The secret ledger was in a federal evidence locker. Marcus was in the back of an unmarked government vehicle. Suddenly, the divorce felt like the least of my worries. The real reckoning had just begun, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the one in control. The weeks that followed were a chaotic blur, managed in almost total secrecy. I wasn't hiding in some cheap motel. I was moved to a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment in a secure building in Chicago, owned by a holding company. The paper trail was so complex, even Alex joked he couldn't follow it. A gift, he said, from some old business partners of Dad's. Consider it hazard pay. The view was of Lake Michigan, a huge, clean slate of water and sky that felt like pure freedom after the suffocating heat of Miami. I disappeared into the justice system. With Victoria Sterling's at my side, I gave my sworn statement to the U.S. Attorney. I handed over everything: the ledger, the drive, the photos. I even identified the handwriting. In the legal documents, I was just source A, my name redacted from all public files. The case against Marcus Thorne and Arthur Grayson was built silently and brutally. Then the story started leaking. Not all at once, but target warrior strikes. The Wall Street Journal hit first, quoting sources about a cooperation deal in the Ashcraft probe, hinting the rot went much deeper. Marcus's handsome face, looking haggard in a grainy courthouse photo, was suddenly plastered across the business pages. His firm, Thorne Capital, immediately froze all investor withdrawals. The vultures were already circling. Next. The New York Times dropped their bombshell, targeting tycoon Arthur Grayson in their federal investigation. They reported the bankruptcy trustee found evidence of a massive short-selling scheme and gave it to the feds. Grayson's lawyers screamed it was a smear campaign, but they sounded desperate. His stock tanked 15% in a single day. And just like that, I became a footnote. The paparazzi outside my building vanished. The story changed. I wasn't the tragic heiress anymore. I was a witness, protected by the media's quiet respect for a grand jury. About a month after that airport showdown, a courier dropped off a cream-colored envelope, no return address. Inside, one heavy sheet of paper. It said K. He flipped, full confession, all on the record. He's giving them everything: Grayson, the bribes, the entire scheme. He's looking at 18 to 24 months in a low-security prison. His testimony sinks them. Grayson will put up a fight, but it's done. The old bull is going down. Thought you should know. The penthouse deed is being moved to an LLC under your name. The title is clean. It's all yours. Do whatever you want with it. V.S. I stared at the note, recognizing Victoria Sterling's elegant initials. So, Marcus broke. He chose himself over loyalty, just like we predicted. That divorce fund was now just evidence. And the penthouse, the place of deepest shame, was now mine. The irony was almost funny. I didn't feel victorious, just a deep, quiet sense of justice, like the scales were finally balanced. Then my intercom buzzed. "Miss Smith? There's a Sophia Reed here to see you." My doorman used the fake name ID given him for privacy. My heart, which I thought was numb to her, gave a sickening jolt. I told him to send her up. I braced myself for anything: tears, excuses, or more poison. But the Sophia who appeared looked diminished. Her usual fiery confidence was gone. She was in jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back, more like a student than a socialite. She just stood there in my doorway, her gaze sweeping over my new apartment, the river view, all the evidence that I'd rebuilt my life without her. "Can I come in?" Her voice was tiny. I just nodded and stepped aside. I didn't offer her a drink. I just stood there, waiting. She wandered over to the window. "It's a nice view." "Different. It's real," I said. She actually flinched. After a long pause, she turned around. "I came because I don't know why. I just wanted to see you. See if you were all right." I'm fine, Sophia. I know. I've seen the news." She hugged herself tightly. "Marcus is a monster. I get that now. Maybe I always knew, but I wanted what he had, what you had. The security, the power. You wanted the prize," I corrected her, my voice like ice. "You never wanted to build. You only wanted to take." She didn't argue. She just nodded, a tear smearing her mascara. "Yes, I did, and I was an idiot. He used me, the same way he used you. He used me as a weapon against you. I was his trophy. And now that he's cornered, he's thrown me to the wolves. The FBI has already interviewed me, asking about the Bahamas, things he told me. I don't think I'm in legal trouble, but my name is on their list. It's all gone. The life I dreamed of is just gone, and it's all my fault." I just watched her. This woman who was once my sister, now just a stranger shaking in my apartment. The anger I felt was gone, completely burned away. All I felt was a tired sense of pity. "What do you want, Sophia? Forgiveness?" No, she shook her head, almost violently. "I could never ask for that. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. I'm sorry for the betrayal. For being so cruel. What I said in that garage was pure evil. I was so sick with jealousy I wasn't thinking. You were my best friend, and I threw it all away for a man who saw us both as disposable." She met my eyes, and they looked raw. "I'm leaving New York. Going back to Rhode Island. My mom is sick, so I'll help out. It's a decent excuse to just disappear." I didn't say a word. The silence was heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 memories, a real friendship that was now just poison. "I hope you find some peace, Sophia," I said at last. It was all I had to give her. Not forgiveness, but an ending. She nodded, tears starting again. "Thank you." As she was leaving, she stopped at the door. "For what it's worth, you were always stronger than me. I think that's why I hated you." And then she left. I went back to the window, watching the river carry the city's garbage out to sea. One final thread to my old life finally severed. My last meeting with my father took place in his suite at the Lell Hotel. His case was progressing. His decision to cooperate had changed everything. His charges were renegotiated. He was pleading guilty to a single count of securities fraud. He was looking at 12 to 18 months, probably at a minimum security facility. He'd also pay massive restitution from the Zurich accounts, which were now being handed over. He was losing it all, the money, the reputation, his freedom, but he was getting to keep his life and a chance at a future. We sat on a balcony overlooking the city. He looked exhausted but calm. "That penthouse is yours," he told me. "You should sell it. The money from that will be enough for a fresh start, no strings attached." "I'm not selling it," I said. He looked surprised. "Why not?" "That place is full of terrible memories." "Exactly," I replied. "It's my trophy, and I am going to sell it, just not on the open market. I'll auction it, and every single cent will go to a new foundation. The Ashcraft Financial Justice Initiative. It will provide legal help to people cheated by men like Marcus. It will protect whistleblowers and teach financial literacy to those who need it most." My father just stared at me, his eyes wide. A slow, proud smile grew on his face. "You're turning poison into medicine." "I'm turning a liability into an asset." I smiled back. "You taught me that." He reached out and took my hand. "I taught you the numbers. You, my girl, you learned the heart. I am just so incredibly proud of the woman you are now. After all this ugliness, you didn't just survive. You flourished. I had a great teacher, I whispered back, squeezing his hand, even when he taught me exactly who I never wanted to become. The morning of my father's hearing was cool and clear. He wore a plain dark suit and stood straight, his voice firm as he pleaded guilty. The courtroom was mostly empty. It was a procedural step, but I was there. My mother, Victoria Sterlings, sat in the front row. In the back, the bankruptcy trustee, Eleanor Vance, watched with an unreadable expression. The judge, a tough but fair woman, accepted his plea and scheduled the sentencing for 3 months later. She reminded him of the seriousness of his crimes, of all the lives he destroyed. He just stood there, head bowed, and took it. When it was done, we walked down the courthouse steps. A few cameras went off, but the chaos was gone. It felt almost respectful. The world had moved on. He was old news. A plain black car was waiting, not a Rolls-Royce. My father stopped before getting in. "I have to check in with probation," he said. "And then I wait. I'll be there," I told him, every visiting day. He pulled me into a hard, desperate hug. "I know, now go. Live your life, build something incredible." I just stood there and watched the car pull away. I had a lump in my throat, but I didn't cry. This wasn't an ending, just a pause. 1 year later, I was at the Financial Women's Association Gala. I was nominated for an award for my work on the Ashcraft Initiative. In a single year, we'd already funded over 24 lawsuits against loan sharks, helped hundreds of retirees who'd been scammed, and started a high school program now active in 5 states. We'd gotten millions back for the victims. The Ashcraft name didn't mean scandal anymore. It meant justice, a real fighting chance. I wore a simple green dress with my Mother-S diamond earrings. For the first time in my life, I wasn't playing a role. I was just me. I'd auctioned the Gold Coast mansion for $32 million, a new record for the neighborhood. Every last cent went to my new urban renewal fund. I lived on a modest director's salary and some simple, boring investments I'd made with my emergency cash. My new home was a sunny 1-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park. It was all mine. My name was on the deed. I'd filed for divorce, citing fraud and abandonment. With Julian turning state's evidence against his own father, the old man was fighting the charges from his yacht in the Keysons. He was losing. The divorce was just a piece of paper. It went through 2 months ago. I was Clara Vance again, standing at that podium, looking out at a room full of Chicago's most influential women leaders in business, politics, and the arts. I felt none of my old anxiety. No need to be perfect. A year ago, I started, my voice ringing clear and confident through the ballroom. I discovered the world I was living in was a house of cards built on bad deals and the egos of men who thought their net worth made them gods. I was raised to believe my only asset was my appearance. I was told I was a liability, a problem to be managed. I could see women nodding. Everyone there knew what it felt like to be dismissed. I was handed a set of keys. They were meant to lock me in a beautiful prison, to live a quiet life of shame in the shadows. Instead, I used them to open new doors, to create a space where the truth mattered. I learned that the best investments aren't in property or stocks or portfolios. They're in the truth, and in the courage to defend it. I spoke about the fund, about taking a symbol of my own betrayal and turning it into an engine for rebuilding communities. I talked about second chances. I never said Julian's name or his father's. They were just footnotes in my story, not the main plot. When I finished, the applause felt like a physical force, a powerful wave of support and understanding. As I stepped down, women came up to shake my hand, press their cards into my palm, and whisper their encouragement. Then, as the crowd began to drift toward the open bar, I saw him. He was leaning against a marble column near the back, half concealed by the shadows. My heart skipped. Leo Russo. We'd met years ago at Northwestern. Felt like another life. He was a scholarship kid from the South Side. He was brilliant, driven, with a sense of justice so sharp it was almost intimidating. We'd had a connection. Not really dating, but definitely more than a friendship. A series of intense debates in the library stacks. Coffees that stretched into late nights. One amazing kiss after we broke a story for the campus paper that felt like the start of everything. But then Julian S. father made some dismissive remark about him. And I, wanting to keep the peace, wanting to belong, just faded away, Leo noticed. He never confronted me. He just gave me one long look with those piercing, dark eyes that missed nothing, and he walked away. I'd heard he became a Pulitzer-nominated journalist for the Chronicle, specializing in financial crime, a corporate watchdog. He looked older now. The youthful fire in his face had settled into a lean, confident strength. He wore a dark, tailored suit that fit him like it was made for him. He was watching me. A small, unreadable smile was playing on his lips. I started weaving my way through the clusters of people, my heart doing a ridiculous little flutter. He pushed off the column as I approached. "Clara Vance," he said. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but that unmistakable Chicago accent was still there. A solid, honest sound. "That was one hell of a speech." "Leo Russo," I replied, stopping a few feet from him. "I didn't know you covered the high society charity circuit. I'm a fan of poetic justice. And of fresh starts." His eyes, still that same intense coffee brown, studied my face. "You look different. In the best way. You look like you. It's the lighting," I joked, trying to hide a sudden wave of nerves. "It's not the lighting." He finally smiled, a genuine one that lit up his features and chased the shadows away. "I've been following your fund's work. The Vance Initiative. It's really impressive. Bold. Thank you. I heard you're a senior reporter at the Chronicle now. Taking down corporate villains. Something like that. Actually, my investigative team and I gave your fund a little anonymous help a few months back. The data leak on that corrupt housing developer case. That was us." I just stared. I'd seen the confidential source cited in our legal but I never imagined it was him. "You never reached out. I wanted to see what you'd do with it on your own." He stepped a little closer, and the chatter of the gala seemed to melt away. "I'll admit, when I saw the headlines last year, the bankruptcy, the whole scandal, I was worried about you. I thought the princess in the glass tower might not survive the fall. Turns out the tower was the cage," I said quietly. "The fall was how I got out." He held my gaze, and in that moment, I saw the ghost of the newsroom. The story we never finished, the life I walked away from. "I'm glad you got out, Clara." "Me too." A tense, meaningful silence settled between us, one filled with a decade's worth of unspoken questions. "Look," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "This is probably awful timing and the worst possible venue, but I'm in town for a few weeks, wrapping up that housing story. I was wondering if you'd maybe want to get coffee or a drink to compare notes on cleaning up this city or whatever, really. It wasn't some grand romantic move. It was just a simple, quiet question, a hand reaching across a canyon of my past mistakes. I looked at him, this man who was a living reminder of a different path, a more authentic me, a girl I'd almost forgotten, and I realized the woman I'd become wasn't the socialite or the scorned wife or the woman who got revenge. She was someone who fought for what was right and won. She was someone who could finally make her own calls. Without fear, I smiled. A real, honest smile that came from somewhere deep inside. "Comparing notes sounds suspiciously like work, Leo. How about dinner?" The look of surprise, followed by the slow bloom of hope in his eyes, felt better than any applause. "Dinner?" he repeated, his own smile widening. Tomorrow, I asked. He nodded. A promise. He touched my elbow. Just a brief, warm press of his fingers, and then he was gone, absorbed back into the crowd. He left me standing there, the silk of my dress feeling cool against my skin. The feeling of possibility was a tangible thing. I looked past the glittering ballroom, out at the Chicago skyline stretching into the night. That chapter was over. The accounts were settled. My ex-father-in-law was about to learn about justice, and I, Clara Vance, was free. Not just free from a toxic marriage or a tarnished legacy. I was free to decide, free to build, free to be. The start of my new life wasn't a lightning strike. It was a quiet moment of choice in a crowded room. It was a second chance, offered and accepted. It was the simple, undeniable truth that the most valuable asset I ever recovered was myself. And this story, my real story, was only just beginning.